After Lily had been stabbed by Craig Hill, Kevin rushed her to the emergency room at Downtown General. The hospital arranged to have Dr. Willow flown in to operate on her. The surgery took hours, but she was finally sent to recovery. Dr. Willow came into the waiting room to tell Kevin the good news. He excitedly hugged her when he heard that his wife would be okay. "Thank you, doctor. We owe it all to you." She was caught off guard and blushed a little as she asked him, "Kevin, do you think you can let go of me?" Kevin immediately stopped hugging her and felt a little embarrassed. "Please don't take it the wrong way. I'm just so excited." "I understand completely, but you really don't have to thank me. I'm a doctor. This is what I do," Dr. Willow explained quietly. Seeing how shy Dr. Willow could be made Kevin smile a little. "Lily should be out of recovery soon, and then they'll take her up to her room," Dr. Willow went on. "If there's nothing else, I need to go to my office and rest a little. It's been a long night." Part of the arrangement for her transfer to New York was that she got to keep her office at Downtown General. Kevin went to the nursing station to find out which room Lily had been moved to. When he got there, he could see that she still looked weak. She needed a lot of blood when she got to the ER, but Lily was still alive, and that definitely lifted Kevin's spirits. Just then, Kevin's phone vibrated a few times. He pulled it out and saw that he'd missed 6 calls. One was from Dalton, and the rest were from Professor Murdoch. Kevin knew right away that it was because of the neutralization pill. Before he had a chance to reply, he heard a weak voice call his name. "Kevin." Lily had already woken up from the anesthesia and was staring at him with her big eyes. He put his phone away and walked over to her bed. "How do you feel, honey?" Kevin asked with concern as he held Lily's hand. "It hurts," Lily complained. "Of course it hurts. Do you know how much blood you lost?" Kevin scolded her. "How could you do such a foolish thing? That knife was meant for me. You shouldn't even be here." "Because I'm your wife. How could I stand there and do nothing?" Lily said slowly. "Besides, the whole mess with the Hill family was my fault. If it wasn't for me." Okay. But now the most important thing you have to do is recover and to get home. Let's leave all of that in the past," he told her casually. Just then, the door opened and Dorothy walked in with some of her friends. She hurried over to the bed, pushing Kevin out of the way as she passed him. "Lily, how are you?" she asked with concern. Dorothy had stayed up all night playing cards with her friends and only found out about an hour ago that something had happened to her daughter. "Don't worry, Mom. I'm fine," Lily answered weakly. Dorothy nodded and turned around to glare at Kevin. "How did something like this happen to my precious daughter? What do you have to say for yourself?" "Mom, I'm sorry. It's all my fault that I didn't," Kevin started to explain. "I don't care if you feel sorry. If this is in any way your fault, I'll have you thrown out of the hospital immediately," Dorothy scolded him. This time, Kevin felt like he deserved to be yelled at. It was his fault that Lily had gotten injured, and he was feeling incredibly guilty as he pleaded with Dorothy. "Mom, don't be angry. I promise that—" "Don't call me Mom," she interrupted. "I wish Lily had never met you. Whether this is your fault or not, I want you out of here." She paused for a moment and then added, "Wait. As soon as Lily can get out of bed, I want the two of you to get a divorce. I don't ever want to see your face again." "Mom, please calm down," Lily begged her mother. "It's not Kevin's fault at all." While she spoke, she kept glancing over at Kevin. She really wanted to smooth things over with her mother. "I'm just going to step out and find out what meds Lily needs," Kevin told her. He decided it would be a good idea to leave the room for a few minutes. Lily looked at Dorothy and her friends. "Mom, were you out playing cards again?" "Don't be silly, Lily. My friends and I were just strolling around." Dorothy had no problem lying to her daughter, but one of her friends wouldn't let her. "Dorothy, you shouldn't lie to your daughter like that," Jasmine Coleman corrected her loudly. "And so what if we were playing cards? Are you trying to get out of your debt?" When she said that, Dorothy immediately gave her a dirty look. A trace of doubt also flashed across Lily's eyes. Get out of your debt? What debt? Mom, don't tell me you owe these women money, Lily asked in confusion. Yes, I do, Dorothy answered hesitantly. The previous night had been Dorothy's unluckiest night in a while. She didn't just drop a couple thousand, she lost over $500,000 in a single card game. Your mother lost a lot of money last night. She owes me almost $250,000, and she owes my friends here another $400,000, Jasmine revealed to Lily. Then Jasmine coldly informed Lily, even though you're in the hospital, you still have to pay your debts, so hurry up and give us our money. We need to head home and get some rest. When Lily heard this, she was so angry that her sutures almost popped out. How could Dorothy lose so much money in just one night? What was wrong with her family? Mom, didn't you promise me you wouldn't go out and play cards? Lily snapped at her mother. I was feeling lucky. Anyway, it's just a few $100,000, Dorothy sputtered. But she knew deep down that what she had done was wrong. Lily was furious. How could her mother have done this when she knew that things were tight? And how could Lily find that much money in such a short time? Mom, did you forget I already promised that money to Grandma? Lily asked her as she tried to catch her breath. I only have $1,500 in my checking account, and we need it for our living expenses and taxes. Oh, I completely forgot, Dorothy suddenly realized. I don't care what kind of problems your family has. If you don't pay me what you owe me right now, you'll see what happens, Jasmine threatened. She realized that Dorothy wasn't as strong as she seemed, and she could easily bully her. Let's talk it over, Jasmine. Just give me a few days and I'll get you the money, Dorothy promised as she laughed nervously. No, I need to see the money today. I don't want you to play any tricks on us, Jasmine said coldly. And if your daughter doesn't have it, you'll have to ask your son-in-law. Dorothy, why didn't you tell us you didn't have any money? Why did you waste our time making us play cards all night? You need to pay us what you owe, Jasmine sneered. And don't ever play with us again. Hey, I just remember something. Dorothy, isn't your son-in-law that guy everybody's been talking about? He must have put away a few bucks living off of your family for the past few years, Jasmine suggested mockingly. Dorothy flinched when she heard her mention Kevin. I'll ask you one last time, are you going to pay us or not? Jasmine snarled. Just give me a few days. I'll pay you back as soon as I can. Besides, whenever you owed me money in the past, I didn't force you to pay me back like you're doing today, Dorothy implored her. How can you even compare yourself with me? My husband is in the real estate business. No matter how much money I lose, I can take care of it with a phone call. You're out of your league, Jasmine retorted as she started to lose her patience. I'll give you two choices. Either you pay me back immediately, or I'll call someone who will make you do it. You've gone too far, Jasmine. Is that how you treat a friend? Dorothy smiled apologetically. So you're telling me you're not going to pay, is that it? Jasmine asked as she pulled out her phone. Jasmine! Dorothy was so anxious that she almost stomped her foot. She knew that Jasmine knew some very nasty people. Jasmine waited for the call to connect and put it on the speakerphone. Spencer, are you there? It's Aunt Jasmine. I'm at Downtown General. Someone owes me a ton of money and she's refusing to pay me back. Who the hell would do that? Came an angry voice over the speaker. I'll be down there right away. Jasmine hung up and smiled triumphantly. She knew that her nephew was one of the most powerful men in Chicago and he had hundreds of people under his command. She was certain that Dorothy and her daughter would pay her what they owed her now. Lily struggled to sit up in her bed. Can you please wait a few more days, Jasmine? We really don't have that much money on hand today. Lily had heard James's nephew's voice, and it sounded like he wouldn't try to resolve this peacefully. It's not that I'm being unreasonable, but there are certain things that everyone knows. You don't gamble if you don't have enough to cover your bets, Jasmine replied snobbishly. Dorothy and Lily were speechless. They all sat in awkward silence and waited for Jasmine's nephew to arrive. A little while later, there was a flurry of footsteps in the hall and the door flew open violently. "Who the hell owes my aunt all that money? You'd better be ready to leave town," the tall man shouted as he walked into the room with his bodyguards. They were a tough-looking bunch. Several nurses saw them and ducked into patients' rooms to stay out of their way. The group's leader was none other than Spencer, the man Kevin had asked to be his deputy in the Chicago branch of the Myriads. His brother Derek would have been there too, but he had other business to attend to. "Did you hear me?" Spencer shouted. "Who exactly owes my aunt money?" "Thanks for coming here, Spencer," Jasmine replied as she pointed at Dorothy. "She's the one who owes me and my friends over $600,000. "You?" Spencer glared at Dorothy as he sauntered over to her. "Do you know what I do to people who don't pay their debts?" "I didn't say I wouldn't pay her, I just don't have the money right now," Dorothy admitted reluctantly. She was absolutely trembling in fear. "That's no excuse," he answered coldly. "Our family really doesn't have the money right now. It'll take me a few days to get it together," Lily tried to explain. She was having a hard time talking. After all, she'd just gotten out of surgery. But she could see that the man's arm was covered with scars. He clearly didn't mind resorting to violence. "Why are you wasting your time, Spencer? They said they don't have the money. Just take them," Jasmine ordered her nephew. His men started moving Lily and Dorothy with vicious looks in their eyes. "Don't touch my daughter," Dorothy shouted as she stepped in front of Lily. "She just got out of surgery and she shouldn't be moved." "Go to hell," Spencer growled as he pushed Dorothy aside. Suddenly there was a furious roar from the doorway. "Stop it right now." Kevin walked into the room and the Myriads were stunned to see him. Dorothy was actually relieved to see Kevin. She pointed at him and told the men, "This man is my son-in-law. Just ask him for the money. If he doesn't have it, you can beat him up for all I care." "Your son-in-law? What the hell's going on here?" As Spencer turned around, his voice trailed off. He was in shock. "Enforcer?" Spencer stammered as he tried to process what was going on. Dorothy said that the enforcer was her son-in-law, so that would make her. He knew he was in big trouble. "What are you guys doing in the hospital?" Kevin asked with a slight frown. The men got over their shock and started to greet Kevin very genially, but Kevin quickly raised his hand to stop them. "Tell me what happened." "Nothing much, Enforcer. I just came to the hospital for a checkup because I wasn't feeling well. I happened to pop into this room to take a look." He lied through his teeth. He wouldn't dare admit that he was there to demand money from Dorothy and Lily. The Myriads remembered what Kevin had done to Nolan Hill at the Salix Leaf Hotel, and they knew he wasn't someone you wanted to piss off. But Kevin wasn't a fool. Of course, he didn't believe Spencer's excuse, so he walked over to Lily and asked her, "Honey, what's going on?" "They came to ask for money," Lily admitted. Then she told Kevin what had happened between her mother and the women who were in the room. After learning about Dorothy's gambling problem, Kevin looked at her and then he looked over at Spencer. "We're finished now," Spencer thought to himself as he considered the situation. "I just had to come here and demand money from the enforcer's wife while she's lying in a hospital bed. We're all dead men." "I'll cover her debt," Kevin said calmly. Even though Dorothy hated him and she'd really crossed a line this time, he was still her son-in-law. Kevin figured it was his duty to help her pay back the money. "There's no need for that, Enforcer," Spencer responded right away. How could he take any money from Kevin? He was starting to regret ever answering his aunt's call. "I'm telling the truth. Give me your routing number and I'll transfer the money. I can't possibly let you come here for nothing, can I?" Kevin insisted. $600,000 wasn't much money to him. How could he refuse to pay what his family owed just because he was the Myriad's enforcer? That wouldn't set a good example for the other members, would it? Dorothy and Lily were still trying to figure out what was going on. When Dorothy wasn't able to settle her gambling debts, Jasmine called her nephew Spencer to force her to pay up. Spencer arrived soon afterward and was threatening Dorothy and Lily when Kevin came into the room. Spencer and his men recognized Kevin as the Chicago branch enforcer of the Myriads. They offered to cancel the debt, but Kevin insisted on paying what Dorothy owed. "But I couldn't possibly accept that from you," Spencer protested. He was scared out of his mind at the thought that he'd been threatening the enforcer's wife. The whole room fell silent. Jasmine, Dorothy, and the others just stood there with their mouths hanging open. What the hell was going on? How could all of these ferocious men be so afraid of Kevin? And did they just call him the enforcer? Jasmine had never seen anything like this before. Her nephew usually handled her problems right away because he was such an intimidating figure. Jasmine was perplexed by the whole situation. "Listen to me, Spencer," Kevin said as he pointed at Dorothy. "She's my mother-in-law, and I'm willing to pay the money she owes to your aunt and her friends. It's only fair." "We can't let you pay her debt, enforcer. We don't want your money. In fact, if I'd known this young woman is your wife, I wouldn't have even come here with my men," Spencer insisted desperately. Lily lay in the hospital bed watching Kevin through tearful eyes. How many other things had her husband kept hidden from her? "Just accept the money. I'm not kidding." Kevin practically begged Spencer to let him pay. "Please, enforcer. I couldn't possibly take anything from you," Spencer pleaded. Jasmine looked questioningly at her nephew. "What's wrong with you, Spencer? I won the money fair and square." "Aunt Jasmine, we really can't take their money," Spencer tried to explain. "No, that won't do. I must have what she owes me," Jasmine demanded. She looked at Kevin and had an idea. "I have no idea why you're so afraid of him. Have you mistaken him for someone else? He's just Dorothy's loser son-in-law." "Please, Aunt Jasmine, you have to stop talking," Spencer said curtly. He couldn't help thinking about what he saw Kevin do to Nolan Hill as he sobbed. "My aunt doesn't know who you are. Please accept my apologies." "Don't worry about it. But please stop all this groveling," Kevin replied as he rubbed his forehead. This was the first time he'd ever encountered a situation where he couldn't even give away his money. "I appreciate your understanding, sir," Spencer said gratefully. Jasmine realized she was getting nowhere, so she announced dejectedly, "I'm pretty tired after playing cards all night. I think I'll just head home and get some rest. Bye, Spencer." She and her friends quickly walked out of the room, leaving Dorothy staring at Kevin in disbelief. Her opinion of her son-in-law had changed a lot. Did he meet some big shot while he was in jail? Dorothy thought to herself. But Kevin didn't care what Dorothy was thinking about. He walked over to Lily and kissed her on the cheek. Then he said softly, "Everything's okay now. You should get some rest. I have a few things to take care of." "Yes, honey," Lily nodded in agreement. Kevin stood up and took a deep breath. He glanced at the Myriads who were standing there looking very agitated. "Don't just stand there. Come along with me. I've got something I want you to do for me." Kevin walked out of the room and the rest of the men quickly followed behind him. Kevin led them to the stairwell door and gave Spencer an order. "I want you to take some of your men and find out everything you can about the Hill family for me." "Are you talking about the family from Detroit?" Spencer asked in surprise. "You know about them?" Kevin asked with a slight frown. "We've worked with them before and I know them pretty well. They're very strong, but not a big challenge to most of the people in the Myriads or the Alliance," Spencer explained. He had a good idea of what Kevin had in mind. "Very strong? That doesn't matter to me. I want Craig Hill to suffer for what he's done," Kevin growled as he clenched his fists. "Have everyone meet me at the Whistler Hotel tonight at 7 o'clock. I've got something important to announce." "Yes, sir," Spencer replied as he took his men and quickly headed downstairs. Next, Kevin called Mitchell Cook to ask him to clear out the hotel for the evening. When Kevin got to the hotel, he saw the only people there were the Myriads and the hotel staff. A large buffet had been set up on the first and second floors. In the largest private room on the top floor, Kevin sat at the head of a long table, and dozens of representatives from the other branches sat along the sides. "Enforcer, we finished our investigation," Spencer reported. "What did you find?" Kevin asked him tersely. "I don't know why the Hills family strength has increased so much in the past few years, but the most important ones are Craig Hill's 5 adopted children. They're quite advanced in their training, and they've obviously benefited from herbal medications. And they're giving the family a real edge in their competition, especially their financial dealings." 5 adopted children? Kevin pondered as he swirled the wine in his glass. "There's one more thing. Their compound is heavily guarded," Spencer hurried to add. "Sounds like this won't be easy," Kevin commented as he put his wine glass on the table. "Can you think of a way to get at them?" "I really don't know how we could take them down without heavy losses," Spencer informed him bluntly. "Do you really think so? No matter how many we sent against them?" Kevin asked. But deep down inside he already knew the answer. If Craig Hill's children were as powerful as Spencer had said, they could resist any number of attackers. "And there's something else, Enforcer. They're expanding their operations to Chicago. It's possible that they have another trick up their sleeve," Spencer pointed out. He had to lay out the facts, even at the risk to his own family. "So you're saying that we can't do anything about them?" Kevin asked grimly. "No, that's not what I'm saying. We just have to chip away at them. To overcome their strength, we have to take them out one by one. If we go after all of them at once, we'll only hurt ourselves," Spencer said confidently. "So what's your plan? This is no time to beat around the bush," Kevin stated plainly. "From what we've found out, Craig Hill's 5 adopted children all have different hobbies and interests. We can use that to set up a trap for them," Spencer explained. It sounded like a good strategy to Kevin. He gave Spencer his approval. "All right, then I'll leave the details up to you. Whatever the cost, you have to set things up right. But I want his children taken alive. As for the others, I don't care what happens to them." If they were as powerful as Spencer had said, Kevin might as well keep them alive. They could be useful to him. "I promise I won't let you down," Spencer agreed excitedly. Kevin nodded in agreement and raised his glass high in the air. He announced loudly, "This is the first time I've given you orders since I became the Enforcer. I wish you all success." "Don't worry, Enforcer. You can count on us," one of the senior members replied so that everyone could hear. The rest of them stood up and shouted, "Yes!" Kevin let them all eat and drink as much as they wanted. He fell asleep very late in the back room that Cook had reserved for him. The next morning, Kevin washed up quickly and drove straight to campus so he could get to Professor Murdoch's class on time. Penny passed a note to Kevin as soon as she sat down. It read, "Are you free tonight? I still owe you dinner." Kevin smiled and shook his head. Penny was still trying to make up for that whole thing with her cell phone. After their dinner plans were interrupted by Professor Murdoch, Kevin had completely forgotten about it. If she hadn't given him a note just now, he never would have given it another thought. "Good work, Kevin. You've already made friends with the cutest student in our class," Dalton commented as he saw the note on Kevin's desk. Dalton knew about Penny's reputation, and he also knew that everyone in the school wanted to get to know her. Boy, would they be jealous to know that she'd actually asked Kevin out to dinner. It was a dream come true. "It's no big deal, Dalton. Do you want to come along?" Kevin smiled as he patted his friend on the shoulder. "You don't have to ask me twice," Dalton replied happily. Of course he was married, but it was just a dinner with friends, not an affair. He was sure that his wife Miranda would trust him. "Sounds like a plan." Kevin wrote back to her very casually, "I'm free this evening, but I want to bring Dalton along too." Penny opened up the note and took a look at it. She quickly scribbled a reply and handed it back to Kevin. "That's up to you." The way she saw it, it was just a meal. It would be nice to have an extra person along. Just then, a woman walked into the room and went to the podium and put her briefcase on the table. Some of the students had noticed her in the halls, but nobody said anything inappropriate after what they saw happen to Chase Rogers on the first day of class. "Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Wendy Colt, your medicinal herb instructor. I'm in charge of teaching all of you how to concoct pills and make herbal medicine. Today, I'll take you to the pill room to take a look at our facilities. I'll also give you a sample pill while we're there," Professor Colt explained in a very professional tone. "Professor Colt, does this mean that the school still believes in concocting pills?" one of the students asked her hesitantly. "Of course. Medicinal pills are a very important aspect of personal growth and development. Good medicinal pills can help someone to advance by leaps and bounds," she replied very directly. "However, as there were fewer and fewer apothecaries over the years, we lost some of our knowledge base, so the current formulas are exceptionally rare. The preparation techniques that you will learn have been developed over the past several decades from piecing together what information we had left, combined with modern pharmaceutical techniques. That's how we're able to approximate the original lost recipes," Professor Colt explained. "So even though they're not exactly the same as the pills of the past, we like to think that they're even better," Professor Colt boasted as she led the students out of the classroom. Most of these students had only seen a few herbal meds in their lifetime. Now they found out that they'd be able to learn the secrets of pill concoction. How could they not be excited by this? A few minutes later, they arrived at the science building and headed into the pill room. The enormous space was lined with exotic plants, and there were long tables running from one end of the room to the other. Each table had a large bowl and some preparation equipment that looked a little like kitchen utensils. Professor Colt divided the class into smaller groups. Kevin and Dalton were happy to see that they'd been assigned to the same group. Some of the other students were jealous to see that Penny was also put in Kevin's group. "Everyone, please listen to me. The school permits you to take any pills you make out of this room as long as it's been inspected and approved by the instructor. Please note that some of the ingredients have been artificially grown. They're very difficult to find in nature," she informed them. "You have to listen to my instructions very carefully. Don't do anything without checking with me first. Today, I'm going to show you how to make the healing pill. Its main purpose is to treat all kinds of external injuries. Under normal circumstances, it only takes 2 hours to take effect and heal your injuries," Professor Colt explained as she went to a large cabinet and took out 6 kinds of medicinal ingredients. She used the equipment on the table to measure and prepare the ingredients in the bowl. Then she lit a Bunsen burner on the table. While she was doing this, she continued to describe what she was doing to the attentive group of students. "Wow, Professor Colt is so awesome," one of the students exclaimed. "Yeah, this stuff's really cool," her classmate replied. A lot of them never thought they'd actually be able to witness someone making herbal medication. They watched intently as Professor Colt prepared one pill after another.
"Kevin, don't you know how to do that too? I'm very curious to see who's better, you or Professor Colt,"
Dalton remarked as he nudged Kevin in the ribs. "You also know how to make herbal pills?" Penny asked Kevin in amazement. But Kevin didn't answer their questions. Very seriously, he warned them. "Dalton, you and Penny should leave the room right now."
"What's wrong?"
Dalton asked him with a very puzzled look on his face. "Professor Colt must be distracted by talking too much while she's working. She just missed an important step and the bowl is going to explode in less than 5 minutes," Kevin quickly explained. They had to do something, and quickly. Kevin told Dalton and Penny that they needed to get out of the room before Professor Colt's pill bowl exploded.
"Are you kidding me?"
Dalton asked incredulously. It wasn't that Dalton didn't trust Kevin, but Professor Colt was a trained faculty member after all. There's no way she'd make a mistake like that. "You can stay here if you don't mind getting burned to a crisp," Kevin said calmly.
"No way. I'm out of here,"
Dalton said as he walked briskly towards the door. While she was talking, Professor Colt was moving the bowl over the Bunsen burner. She was adjusting the flame to the proper height for the preparation of a healing pill. "Professor, please wait a moment," Kevin interrupted her as he strode towards the table. "Do you have any questions, Kevin?" Professor Colt asked him. The other students in the class all looked at Kevin. They were wondering what stunt he was going to pull this time. "Professor Colt, you're making a big mistake with this pill," Kevin said very nonchalantly. "If you turn off the flame now, there shouldn't be too much damage." This drew an immediate reaction from his classmates, who all broke into laughter. They couldn't believe that he had the nerve to correct the professor while she was putting on a demonstration. With all her experience, there was no way she could be doing anything wrong. Who was he to interrupt her like this? Professor Colt was obviously irritated by Kevin's comment, and she scolded him. "Didn't you hear what I just said, Kevin? The most important thing in preparing a medicinal pill is the flame. If you put out the flame now, the pill will be ruined." She was starting to get angry at Kevin. It was bad enough that he hadn't listened to her lecture, but how could he question her abilities? She was a member of the union and was actually their chief apothecary. While she hadn't made every single possible pill, she still had enormous experience and had made countless healing pills in her career. She'd never had a single problem. "Professor Colt, I'm not questioning your skill. It's just that you didn't use any of the grass in that container as you were measuring your ingredients," Kevin pointed out innocently. He recognized the grass in the container as one of the basic components of any medicinal pill. It was something that you could never leave out because it helped the blending of the other ingredients. The most important thing that it did was to prevent the temperature from increasing too rapidly and causing an explosion. The other students thought that Kevin was just trying to draw attention to himself and confuse everyone. They figured he'd probably never seen anyone make herbal meds in his entire life. Mike couldn't resist putting his 2 cents in.
"Stop making a scene, Kevin. If you don't want to learn anything, just leave. But don't mess it up for the rest of us."
"The class leader's right," Lionel added. Then he let Kevin have it. "Do you know how important this is? If you don't appreciate what Professor Colt is showing us, then just go home." Kevin's classmates started glaring at him in disgust. Dalton started clenching his fists. He knew that Kevin wasn't someone who did things just to get attention. These guys were really ticking him off. Kevin sighed lightly. All he was doing was warning Professor Colt because he cared about what might happen. Why did they all think he was causing trouble? 2 minutes had already passed, and Kevin could see that the bowl was getting too hot. You could feel it from several feet away. "This isn't good. Everyone get down," Kevin yelled. He was done trying to explain and grabbed Professor Colt, pulling her to the floor as he protected her with his body. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed. Kevin's classmates still didn't understand how much danger they were in and started to criticize him. "Let go of Professor Colt," one of them yelled. Mike started rolling up his sleeves to take a swing at Kevin as he shouted,
"Get away from Professor Colt right now. If you don't, I'll report you to the administration and you'll be expelled."
He was about to say something else, but they were all interrupted by a huge explosion from the bowl that Professor Colt had been heating. It was like a volcanic eruption throwing a wave of hot air across the room. Shards of the bowl were flung out as the bowl shattered from the blast. The shock wave knocked some of the students across the room and into the wall. Some of them were cut by fragments of the bowl that flew all over the room. And the mixture had gotten so hot that the herbs were instantly vaporized. Professor Colt was absolutely stunned. She shook her head in disbelief. Had he actually been right? As the rest of the students lay on the ground in a daze, they looked over at Kevin with shocked expressions. It couldn't have been a coincidence. Kevin had been telling the truth after all. But Kevin didn't have time to worry about what his classmates were thinking. He was too concerned about the intense pain he was feeling in his back. Since he'd been closest to the table, he'd also borne the brunt of the heat and debris from the explosion. His clothes were shredded and burned, and he had serious burns on his back. But he'd managed to protect Professor Colt, so she didn't suffer any injuries. Professor Colt came back to her senses and felt Kevin's body lying on top of her. This was definitely an embarrassing position to be in. "Kevin, would you please get off of me?" Professor Colt said very quietly. "Okay, Professor Colt," he replied as he stood up awkwardly. Professor Colt glanced around the pill room and saw the destruction. "Send the injured students to the infirmary. Everyone else should go back home to rest. Today's lesson is over," she announced.
"Are you okay, Kevin?"
Dalton asked as he ran over to his friend. "Don't worry, I'm not dead yet," Kevin replied. It stung a little, but it wasn't as bad as it looked.
Let me get you to a hospital to be sure, Dalton insisted.
He really hadn't expected Kevin to hit the nail on the head like that. He said the bowl would explode in less than 5 minutes, and he was absolutely right. Don't be ridiculous. I'm okay. You should go home and get some rest. Kevin stretched his shoulders a few times.
Okay, sounds like a good idea. Call me if you need anything, Dalton offered without hesitating.
The pill room was still uncomfortably hot, so Kevin decided to head home and change his clothes. Plus, his shirt was pretty tattered from the explosion. On the way out, Professor Colt stopped him. "How did you see the problem with the pill?" she asked him earnestly. "It's very simple, Professor Colt. I saw that you hadn't added the correct ingredients," Kevin explained. But he didn't want her to feel embarrassed, so he added, "It's probably because you were talking to the class while you were working on the pills." "Tell me honestly, do you know how to concoct herbal medicine?" she asked as she looked directly into Kevin's eyes. There weren't many apothecaries left in the world, and the ones who remained guarded their secrets very strictly. So Professor Colt wouldn't believe Kevin if he said that he didn't know anything about making herbal pills, and she certainly wouldn't believe that he just made a lucky guess. "You're right, Professor, but I only know how to make a few kind of pills," Kevin replied modestly. In fact, there probably wasn't a single medicinal pill that he didn't know how to refine. He just needed a little more practice to get better at it. For some reason, Professor Colt was actually very relieved to hear Kevin's explanation. "It's really a good thing to know how to concoct a few kinds of pills. There's currently a great need for more apothecaries. I was lucky enough to join the union and get many years of training from them, but I only know how to produce 10 types of pills." Then Professor Colt sighed. "It's too bad that there are too few apothecaries around these days. The formulas are so hard to find and reproduce that some pills are worth a fortune. For something like the power pill or the augmentation pill, well, they're like miracle drugs." Kevin nearly laughed out loud when he heard her say that. He could easily make the herbal meds that Professor Colt found so unattainable. However, he still had some doubts. The Night King had told him that apothecaries used to have a lot of respect, but there was some kind of incident that had changed everything. "Professor Colt, can you tell me what exactly happened to all the apothecaries?" Kevin inquired. "Oh, that was a long time ago," she answered as she got a nostalgic look in her eyes. "I suppose I can tell you. My mentor always said that the herbal meds could lead to far greater development than anyone had ever imagined. But it's a difficult undertaking," she continued, "and we're only now finding out the similarity between herbal medications and the techniques that are being developed by modern science. There was an apothecary many years ago who actually stumbled on a way to move beyond what his colleagues were doing. The results of his methods were decades ahead of anyone else," she explained. "But should anyone be allowed to become that powerful?" Kevin asked her. The professor nodded in agreement. "You're right, Kevin. His plans were eventually exposed, and he drew a lot of attention from people who were afraid of how powerful he might become. It wasn't easy for them to defeat him, but when they did, they took out many more apothecaries who might also pose a threat. It had devastating effects on the field. Whoever was left went into hiding and destroyed any evidence of their formulas. Once everyone realized just how much had been lost, it was too late to recover," she explained sadly. "A lot of people are interested in developing themselves, but they don't appreciate the art and science involved. Even students at the School for the Healing Arts are just interested in it because it's something new. There isn't anyone who's very committed to it." The more Professor Colt spoke, the more regret Kevin could see in her eyes. Kevin nodded slightly because he understood the problem. From what he'd read in the sources he'd found, an herbal pill could be worth a fortune, but making one took both money and energy. People just didn't seem interested in making the effort to become an apothecary. If this continued, they'd eventually disappear. Suddenly, Professor Colt seemed to have thought of something. Her eyes lit up and she asked, "Kevin, I see that you have some talent. Do you want to participate in the apothecary contest?" "An apothecary contest?" Kevin repeated in amazement. "Yes. Because it's a very rare discipline, about 50 years ago it was decided to look for a way to try to build more interest. All of the major groups and organizations are involved in training their own apothecaries," she explained. "The top 3 finalists receive interesting awards. First place earns admission to the Herbalist Society, second place earns an advanced technique, and the third place winner only gets $750,000. Professor Colt told Kevin eagerly. The Herbalist Society? Kevin asked in surprise. He'd never heard of them before. The Herbalist Society is an institution composed entirely of apothecaries. They serve the top levels of business and government. The leading organizations send their most outstanding students to study with them every year. It's an extraordinary honor. Anyone who studies with them is highly sought after when they complete their training, she told him excitedly. Because of that, many people in the Herbalist Society have become wealthy and famous. Their careers really take off, Professor Colt gushed. Every participant in the contest can bring along an assistant. It just so happens that I've been looking for a candidate for the past few days. If you want to participate, come along with me. Even if you don't win, you can learn a lot. All right, Professor Colt. I'll go with you, Kevin agreed without thinking twice. What happened over the past few years had broadened Kevin's horizons. He used to think that as long as he had money, he'd be fine. But now that he'd seen the potential of herbal medicine and training, he wanted something more. Although Chicago was a pretty big city, the country was a whole lot bigger. If he wanted to have a future, he had to step onto a bigger stage. Plus, he needed to make good use of the books he'd been reading. Because of the accident in Professor Colt's class, Kevin's dinner with Penny had to be put off again. After saying goodbye to Professor Colt, Kevin headed home and went straight to the study to get ready for the apothecary contest. The first thing that he did was to make an herbal med to help Lily recover from her injuries. She recovered very quickly and was discharged from Downtown General to the amazement of the hospital staff. On the following weekend, Kevin was still half asleep when he smelled a delicate fragrance. Lily kissed his forehead and said, "Hubby, the sun is already up and you should be too." "Can't I sleep for 10 more minutes?" Kevin drawled as he struggled to open his eyes. "No, hurry up and get out of bed. If Mom finds out that you're still lazing around, she'll definitely scold you again," Lily said softly while leaning her head on Kevin's chest. After coming so close to death, Lily understood how important life was and wanted to savor every second with Kevin. Okay, if you say so," Kevin agreed as he got out of bed and got dressed. "It's rare that you don't have to go to work or school on such a nice day. Let's go out for a walk, okay?" Lily asked softly. "Yeah, let's do that. A walk would be nice," Kevin replied as he looked out the window at the view. Lily smiled as she walked up behind Kevin and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Kevin, when I was in the hospital and that man Spencer was so polite to you, did he actually call you the enforcer?" Kevin sighed and quietly said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "I'll believe anything you say," Lily answered softly as she hugged him even more tightly. Kevin was finally ready to tell her everything. Lily and Kevin decided to take a walk downtown and enjoy a quiet day off. She just asked him why Spencer had called him the enforcer, and Kevin was about to tell his wife everything that he'd been keeping from her. But before he could begin to divulge all his secrets to her, his phone suddenly rang.
"Hey, Kevin, what are you doing right now?"
He could hear Marshall's rough voice at the other end of the line. "I'm home. What's wrong?" Kevin asked curiously. Ever since he came back from his meeting with the Alliance, Kevin had let Marshall take over his duties as Alliance manager. They hadn't been in touch with each other in a long time, so Kevin knew that something serious must be going on.
"It's not a big deal. I just want to let you know that the executive director's birthday is in 2 days. Everyone needs to drop what they're doing and head back to headquarters for the celebration. Don't forget that you're our messenger now," Marshall reminded him.
"I understand, but we've got 2 days, don't we? Why are you panicking?" Kevin replied sharply.
"No panic. Just keeping you in the loop. Gotta run," Marshall said as he hung up.
After putting his phone away, Kevin started to have some doubts. He thought that since this was an important gathering, his mentor, the Night King, might be there too. Kevin had a ton of questions for him. On top of that, he had a vague feeling that this would be a crucial meeting. What worried him was that even though Chicago wasn't the largest city in the country, both the Myriads and the Alliance were interested in it. And now the School for the Healing Arts had decided to open a campus too. The city was crawling with powerful people who were interested in herbal meds and martial training. It had Kevin curious. While Kevin was contemplating these things, Lily asked him, "Who was that on the phone, honey?" "Just a friend." Kevin laughed casually. 2 hours later, Lily and Kevin were taking a stroll hand in hand. Lily was eating a soft pretzel they'd gotten from a street vendor. She was feeling like a kid again as she explained to Kevin that she used to have the same treat when she was a kid. "Kevin, why don't we go into that jewelry store over there?" Lily asked sweetly. "Are you sure, honey? We've been walking for over an hour." Kevin felt that if the school had a shopping contest, Lily would win first place, hands down. "Come on, let's go in. I'm in the mood to get some new jewelry," she said coyly. Lily was so excited that she started tugging on Kevin's arm. He finally gave in and the two of them headed into the store. As soon as they walked in, Lily spotted a diamond ring that she wanted. The sales associate noticed that Lily was interested in the ring and walked over to them with a big smile. "This ring is a new arrival, and there's nothing like it in all of Chicago. It's called the Starry Sky Ring." "That's a good name for it," Kevin commented as he admired the brilliant stone. They then heard a delicate voice nearby saying, "Wow, what a beautiful ring. Hubby, can you buy it for me?" Kevin and Lily looked over and saw a couple walking towards them. The man looked like a successful businessman, and he carried himself well. The woman was very pretty, but maybe not quite as pretty as Lily.
"Lily, what a coincidence to bump into you here," the man said cheerfully.
What Kevin didn't know was that the man's name was Clancy Redmond, and the woman's name was Danica. They were both Lily's classmates from college. Clancy had chased after Lily back in the day, but he obviously ended up with someone else. "What a coincidence. I didn't expect to see you guys here," Lily exclaimed as she smiled awkwardly. "And I never expected to cross paths with you here." Danica stared at Lily with an unfriendly gaze. Even though any relationship between Lily and Clancy was long over, Danica was still afraid that they'd rekindle their romance.
"What did you say, Danica?" Clancy pouted.
"Nothing at all. Don't tell me you still have feelings for her," his wife replied in an odd tone of voice. Then she looked disapprovingly at Kevin and remarked, "Oh my, Lily, it's been so long since I last saw you. Have things really gotten that bad? Back in school, all the richest guys were after you. How did you end up with this loser?" Lily was obviously irritated at her comment, and Kevin furrowed his brow. This was far from being a friendly reunion. Danica was being downright hostile. "Don't worry about me, Danica. I'm doing just fine," Lily replied coldly. "That's not what I heard. Everyone in town knows your husband's been freeloading off your family for 3 years. He even went to prison for assault and battery," Danica declared loudly enough so everyone in the store could hear it. They all turned around and stared at Kevin.
"Is that true, Lily? You know, if you're having problems, your husband can join our company. I'll make the arrangement so he can start bringing in a decent salary," Clancy offered with a smile. It sounded like a nice offer, but Lily could tell he had an ulterior motive. He was obviously still interested in her. Clancy had missed Lily a lot after college, but he never expected to get another chance with her. Now it looked like he might be able to take advantage of Lily's troubles with her husband. "There's no need for that. My husband is doing very well now, thank you," Lily replied as she turned around and held Kevin's hand. "Hubby, let's go home. I'm suddenly feeling a little tired." "Okay, honey," Kevin answered quickly. He didn't want to waste any more time with these two boneheads. Then he asked the sales associate, "How much is the ring we were looking at?" "How could a delinquent like you even afford it?" Danica sneered. Then she turned to the associate and asked, "Are you going to wrap this up for me?"
"There's something that I may not have made clear," the saleswoman replied hesitantly. "It's from a very exclusive designer, and you may find it a bit on the expensive side." "No matter how much it costs, I'm sure my husband will gladly buy it for me," Danica said confidently. "In that case, the price is $7 million, she told her excitedly. The associate knew that she would get a hefty commission for the sale. When Clancy heard this, he took a deep breath and thought to himself,
"That's a little friggin' expensive. It may be easier just to steal one."
Even though Clancy had been in business for a few years and had been pretty successful, he had nowhere near that much money to throw around, a few $1,000s at the most.
"Why don't we look at something else, sweetie? That's really expensive,"
Clancy said softly. But Danica wouldn't give up. "I don't care. I want this ring, and I want it right now," she insisted. Clancy wasn't from a wealthy family like Lily, so he didn't have very deep pockets. For Danica, this was a matter of pride. She wanted to show her old classmate that she was just as well off now. Kevin could see how embarrassed Clancy was and commented, "I don't think the question is whether or not you want the ring. It sounds like your husband may not have enough funds to cover it right now." "My husband is a successful person. Do you think he's just a sponge like you?" Danica snapped back haughtily.
"He's right, honey. We can't afford this ring," Clancy admitted nervously.
"I don't care. I want it, and you'll just have to find a way to get it for me," she practically demanded. The sales associate understood what was going on and told them, "I'm sorry, but we have other customers to attend to." And then she started to walk away. "Hubby, let's go home," Lily repeated. Even though she liked the ring a lot, she knew that $7 million was still a big chunk of change. It might be too much for Kevin to handle. "Don't worry, Lily. Since you like it so much, let's buy it," Kevin said with a warm smile. "How could a freeloader like you afford something like this?" Danica mocked him loudly. "My husband's very successful, and it's too expensive for him. And you're living off your wife's income." The other customers in the store started laughing at Kevin. A couple of them recognized him as the guy who'd married into the Jones family. Why was he even wasting everyone's time pretending he could afford something so valuable? Kevin got a little peeved when he heard what they were saying. He took out his bank card and tossed it nonchalantly on the counter. "Wrap it up. We'll take it." He could tell that Lily really liked the ring. "Sir, we don't accept supermarket loyalty cards here." The associate sneered as she looked at his card. Everyone burst into laughter. How could he have the nerve to pull something like that? Kevin couldn't believe how foolishly the salesperson was acting. "Lily, your husband is really cold. Doesn't he know how to behave in a high-end store?" Danica laughed conceitedly. "Nonsense," Kevin snapped at the salesperson. "Just swipe it and you'll see it's good." "Sir, I said that our store doesn't accept discount cards. If this is all you have, please leave. I don't have time to play games," she scoffed. The salesperson had heard what Danica said about Kevin. If all of that was true, how could he possibly buy a ring that was worth $7 million? "Please call your manager," Kevin said impatiently. "Sir, bringing the manager over won't help if you can't afford the ring," she scoffed. Mr. Arnold, the store's manager, had been listening the whole time. He walked over to the counter, took one look at Kevin's black card, and felt like he was going to faint. He picked it up off the counter and asked the sales associate anxiously,
"Where did you get this card?"
"I'm sorry, Mr. Arnold. This man handed me a supermarket discount card," the salesperson replied as she pointed at Kevin. "I told him we can't accept it, but he just wouldn't listen." Mr. Arnold rolled his eyes as he realized he needed to give his employees better training. Then he gulped as he asked Kevin,
"Is this your bank card, sir?"
"What do you think?" Kevin replied coldly. Kevin's directness made Mr. Arnold start to sweat. The customers who'd been laughing at Kevin quieted down when they realized that something was going on. "Hurry up and swipe the card so you can wrap up the ring for my wife," Kevin ordered them. He was tired of wasting his time.
Yes, sir,"
Mr. Arnold replied as he quickly handed the card to the salesperson.
"What are you waiting for? Didn't you hear what this gentleman said?"
"But Mr. Arnold," the salesperson began to complain.
"There's no buts about it," Mr. Arnold interrupted her. "Just swipe his card and wrap up their purchase."
She took Kevin's card and swiped it into her card reader. A moment later, everyone heard the tone that told them that the transaction had gone through. They all looked at Kevin in disbelief. Danica was more surprised than any of them. She was so disappointed that she burst into tears. Clancy didn't even notice how upset his wife was. He glared at Kevin and wondered who the heck he could be. He knew that Lily's family was rich, but not rich enough to toss around this much money. Meanwhile, the store employees were still staring at the balance on the register. They'd never seen anything like it. "Is it wrapped yet?" Kevin urged her frostily. "Yes, sir, it's ready," the salesperson replied as she handed him the bag. Her hands were actually shaking a little, she was so nervous. She just insulted an incredibly rich man, and she had no idea who the heck he was. "Here, Lily, if you decide that you don't like it, you can always throw it away," Kevin said flippantly. They were all shocked to hear him say that. Even Danica stopped crying for a moment. Who could be so rich that they'd talk about throwing out a $7 million ring? Every one of them was tempted to root through Kevin's trash. "Hubby, you're so good to me," Lily exclaimed. She didn't care how many people were there and gave Kevin a big kiss. Just as Kevin was about to say something else to irritate Clancy, his phone suddenly rang. When he checked the caller ID, he saw that it was Phoebe Anderson. Phoebe got straight to the point. "Kevin, are you free now?" "What's the matter?" Kevin asked her tentatively. "If you have time, come to the antique store on Belmont Avenue near Ravenswood as soon as you can. I think you know the place. I need your advice on something really important," Phoebe requested urgently. "Got it," he replied without hesitating. Before Kevin could finish speaking, he got a strange, overwhelming feeling that whatever Phoebe wanted him to look at was going to be very critical for him. Kevin got a very serious look on his face and said to Lily, "I have to go." Right after Kevin bought the Starry Sky ring for Lily, he got a call from Phoebe. She wanted him to meet her right away at an antique store on Belmont Avenue. It sounded very urgent. Kevin had an odd but very strong feeling that the Night King wanted him to go there. "Phoebe asked you to help her?" Lily didn't seem very pleased with the idea. She could easily understand the way Phoebe looked at Kevin. After all, he was very handsome, but that didn't mean she should let down her guard. "She wants me to check out an antique, and I really think that it's important." Kevin had an unusually serious expression on his face. "Then let's go there right away. Plus, that's a really good street for antiquing." Lily took Kevin's hand and they left the jewelry store in a hurry. Belmont Avenue was just north of the Loop in downtown Chicago. There were a lot of interesting antique shops all along the street, and Lily was hoping to have some time to look around. After Kevin and Lily parked, they walked quickly to the shop where Phoebe was waiting. As they passed the other shops, they could see a lot of interesting items in the windows. One of them even had a display that looked like a 1950s kitchen, including appliances. Lily thought it looked really chic with the pastel blue-green cabinets and salmon fridge. When they entered the shop on the corner to meet Phoebe, a large group of collectors was already there having a loud discussion. Kevin and Lily squeezed into the middle of the crowd and found Phoebe standing next to her father at the counter. Truman Anderson was negotiating with a middle-aged man in a three-piece suit. "What's going on?" Kevin glanced at the jewelry box on the counter and frowned a little. "Kevin, you're finally here." Phoebe smiled when she saw him. Phoebe's reaction made both her father and Lily extremely unhappy. "Have you discovered something unusual?" Kevin asked with a smile. "Here's what's going on. The owner of this shop has been a good friend of my father's for many years. He recently got this antique jewelry box, so he asked my father to come over and take a look." Phoebe smiled a little. as she told Kevin the reason she'd invited him along. "You know how my father is. He can't walk away from a good deal. However, my father can't tell whether this thing is real or fake, so I called you." Before Kevin could reply, the man standing next to Phoebe asked,
"Who's your friend?"
"This is Kevin." Phoebe hesitated a little. "He's a good friend of our family, and we trust his opinion a lot." Then she turned to Kevin. "This young man is Walter Beckett." "Hello." Kevin immediately reached out to shake the man's hand.
"Since Phoebe called you, that means you must know something about appraisal."
A look of disdain flashed in Walter's eyes. Kevin didn't answer his question, but instead turned his attention to the gold box on the counter. It had carvings of birds and flowers on all of its sides and on the lid. "What are you doing here, Kevin?" Truman Anderson was in an especially bad mood. Whenever Truman saw Kevin or even heard his name, he thought about that awkward moment when he'd walked into his home and seen his daughter and her friends tied up. He still held Kevin responsible for it. "Phoebe called me over to take a look." Kevin reached out and touched the box, and he furrowed his brow as he studied the low-relief decorations. "Walter, what do you think about this item?" Truman ignored Kevin and spoke directly to the young man who was standing next to Phoebe.
"Truman, even though the piece is very beautiful, I just don't think it's worth the price. I think you should be very careful."
Walter spoke very smoothly. He didn't try to persuade Truman to buy it, but he also didn't tell him not to buy it. But Truman trusted him anyway. What Kevin didn't know was that Walter Beckett was here with Phoebe mainly because of him. Ever since the last time Kevin saw her, Phoebe had spent her days languishing at home, not really interested in anything. It made Truman sad to see his daughter like that. As far as Truman was concerned, Kevin was a bad influence. His only redeeming quality was his ability to appraise antiques. So he asked Mr. Jordan, the store owner, to invite Walter to come to Chicago and then get in touch with his daughter. "What's the seller asking?" Kevin raised an eyebrow and looked up from the box. $2 million. Phoebe stared at Kevin as she answered his question. "Yes, it's worth it. You should take it." Kevin nodded his head in approval. "Kevin, are you serious?" Although Truman didn't like Kevin anymore, he still trusted his opinion on antiques. "Of course I'm serious," Kevin replied firmly. In fact, he had more to say, but he didn't want to talk about it in front of so many people. $2 million was a lot to spend, but Truman thought that he could double his money if Kevin was right.
"That's ridiculous," Walter sneered at Kevin. "Do you really know anything about antiques? While the decorations are very interesting, there's not enough gold just based on weight to justify a price like that," Beckett continued. "On top of that, there isn't a lot of detail in the flowers. It's barely worth $200,000, let alone $2 million. You have no idea what you're talking about." The people who had gathered around them seemed to agree with his comments. One of them even whispered very loudly, "I wouldn't expect any less from one of Mr. Anderson's friends. He's a perfect match for Phoebe." Phoebe was visibly upset when she heard these comments. She was afraid that Kevin would take it the wrong way. The store's owner, Mr. Jordan, also looked distressed. He'd gone through a lot of time and expense to get this antique jewelry box, and now it looked like he might stand to lose a lot of money on it. But he also knew that Walter was an expert appraiser, and there was nothing wrong with what he said, so he couldn't challenge him on it. Truman nodded slightly and spoke to Mr. Jordan. "My friend, I think Walter's right. Perhaps we should hold off on this purchase." "Wait a minute," Kevin suddenly interrupted them. "Truman, if you don't buy this item, you're making a big mistake." Truman sighed when he heard Kevin say this. "I know you have extraordinary potential in antique appraisal, but you're still young and don't have enough experience. You can still make mistakes, but Walter is different. He's had intensive training and has a lot more experience than you do." The onlookers agreed with Truman's comments and nodded their heads in approval. They'd never even seen Kevin before, so how could he come in here and tell everyone what to do? "So you're just going to take his word over mine?" Kevin joked. "It's not that I don't believe you, it's just that I believe Walter more."
When Truman finished speaking, he looked over at Walter. After all, Walter was his future son-in-law. He had to show him some support in front of all these people. "Truman, you really ought to take my advice. If you buy this, you'll make a lot of money." Kevin smiled as he tried to change Truman's mind.
"Why is this little box worth $2 million? Walter scoffed.
"Because it's not just a gold jewelry box. It's gilded ivory," Kevin replied casually. As soon as he said this, the whole shop suddenly became silent. Except Lily. Everyone there was an expert in antiques. They understood where he was going with this. Just take a look underneath. You can see a bit that wasn't covered in gold leaf. Of course, it doesn't make sense to cover valuable ivory with gold, but someone decided to do that. Kevin looked over at Walter and could see that he was a little uneasy. The onlookers still weren't completely convinced. After all, maybe Kevin was just trying to impress Phoebe by refuting Walter's opinion on the object. One of them even scolded Kevin. "You really expect us to believe that? Leave the discussion to the real experts." Truman looked a little embarrassed as he stood there and listened to Kevin. He still didn't understand how the box could be worth so much more than Walter had said. While it had been illegal to trade in modern ivory objects since the early 70s, antiques were usually grandfathered in and completely legal. But that still didn't explain why the box had been covered in gold leaf. "Honey, are you sure you're right?" Lily asked in a worried whisper. "Don't you believe me?" Kevin answered softly.
"Then how can you explain this?"
Walter looked at Kevin like he was some kind of fool.
"Why the heck would someone take a valuable antique and change it so that its value would actually decrease?"
That's a very good question. A gold jewelry box would have some value, but it wouldn't be worth a small fortune, Kevin explained as he picked up the delicate object. "But did any of you actually test the gold?" Then Kevin walked nonchalantly behind the counter and took a bottle of rubbing alcohol and a rag.
"What do you plan to do with that?"
Walter looked both irritated and confused at the same time. "Just watch and you'll see what I'm talking about." Kevin couldn't help smirking a little. "What happens when you wipe cheap gilding with rubbing alcohol?" The whole antique shop fell quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. Kevin put some alcohol on the cloth and wiped away the gold color from one of the corners, revealing a beautiful ivory box with incredible detail. The light coat of gold leaf had obscured a lot of the original artist's work.
"How do you explain this?"
Walter was still challenging Kevin, but he knew it wasn't going well for his own appraisal. "It's very simple." Kevin turned to look at Mr. Jordan, who was standing there with his mouth hanging open. Then he asked, "Did you buy this from someone who'd imported it back in the 80s? "How did you know?" Mr. Jordan asked in shock. Kevin explained. "In order to sneak this piece into the country, someone covered the ivory with a cheap coating of gold leaf. That wasn't really necessary for an antique, but they probably didn't know how old or valuable it actually was." While Kevin spoke, he took out a needle and heated it with a flame. Then he touched the underside of the box and continued to explain. It eventually ended up in the hands of a collector, but they had no idea that this is genuine ivory. You can see how there's a tiny scorch mark, and you can actually smell the ivory a little. Whoever sold this to you knew that it was a 14th century French piece, but they never checked to see what it was really made of. They were all amazed at Kevin's explanation and began to see that his appraisal was probably correct. "If you buy this box, Truman, you definitely won't lose any money on the deal." Kevin put the box back on the counter and everyone began to admire it in a new way. "You really know your stuff." Mr. Jordan was very grateful to Kevin and gave him a thumbs up. If Kevin hadn't been here that day, he would have taken Walter's advice and lost the $500,000 that he had originally spent on the item. All the antique experts in the room were astonished at Kevin's knowledge. They started to feel sorry for criticizing him just a few minutes before.
"Hang on, Truman. I'll make a quick video call and get my teacher Tristan Gabriel to help you sort this out."
Walter pulled out his phone to make the call. Is this young man a student of Tristan Gabriel? They all began to wonder. They couldn't believe that one of Gabriel's students was there with Truman Anderson. He was one of the world's most foremost experts on antiques. Walter could hear what they were all whispering to each other, and it boosted his ego a little, especially since Kevin had just shown him up. Walter knew that Phoebe was still interested in Kevin. If his mentor put Kevin in his place, that would certainly make him look a lot better in her eyes. Soon the video call was connected, and the face of a thin elderly man appeared on the screen. Walter, aren't you supposed to be in Chicago right now? Why are you calling me again? Gabriel's voice was a little harsh sounding.
Sir, I just appraised an antique jewelry box, but someone here said that it's worth 10 times more than my estimate.
Walter explained simply. What? Can you show it to me? Tristan was excited to see what his student was talking about. Nobody in the store could believe that Walter was able to get in touch with his renowned expert so quickly. It was very impressive. They'd all heard of Tristan Gabriel, but it was rare to see him in person, even on a video call. While everyone kept whispering to each other, Walter pointed his phone camera at the box on the counter. After a moment, everyone heard Gabriel's voice booming out of the phone's speaker. Haven't you learned anything from me? Don't you know what this is? No one had expected him to be so grumpy. But what they really wanted to know was what this expert's appraisal was. Who was right, Walter or Kevin? Walter had just contacted his teacher, Tristan Gabriel, on a video call to help decide who was right about the antique box, him or Kevin. Everyone in the store was very impressed to see that Walter actually knew the most prominent antique appraiser in the country. Then one of them realized that Kevin was the guy that they'd heard about who married into the Jones family to sponge off of them. They all started to point at Kevin and whisper to each other. Walter smiled smugly. At first, he thought that Kevin might be some kind of genius at antique appraisal. But if what everyone was saying was true, he didn't have anything to worry about. He started to feel even more contempt for Kevin. Kevin, what are you doing? Lily tugged on her husband's sleeve to try and get him to back down. But Kevin waved Lily off casually. He picked up the box and held it so that it would show up clearly on Walter's phone. Walter saw that Kevin actually wanted his teacher to get a good look and started to worry that maybe he'd made a mistake. But the onlookers didn't realize what was going on. They thought that Kevin was just acting foolish and would soon be put in his place. Walter began to wonder if Kevin knew something that he didn't. Then Kevin spoke directly to the camera. Tristan, open your eyes and take a good look at the box. You can see that it probably belonged to the French nobility in the 14th century. My guess is it was involved in a marriage proposal. Don't you think so? Then he said very impolitely, or do you need to get new glasses? Kevin, don't be so rude. How can you speak to Mr. Gabriel like that? Truman was shocked at Kevin's behavior. Although Truman had been friends with Gabriel for many years, he'd always shown him the utmost respect. Walter got angry too.
Who do you think you are, Kevin? Nobody talks to Mr. Gabriel that way.
The rest of the onlookers were also taken aback. How could Kevin be so disrespectful to a national expert? But what they heard next surprised them even more. Is that you, Kevin? Kevin Williams? Gabriel became very excited and said, I'm sorry I didn't notice it was you. Then Gabriel snapped at Walter. Walter, what kind of cheap cell phone are you using? Can't you get a clearer image? I can barely see anything. Walter couldn't believe what he was hearing. His phone was brand new and top of the line, but he didn't dare correct his mentor. Are you sure it's not a crack in your screen? I remember you were always dropping your phone. Kevin was chatting with him like they were old friends, and the onlookers were dumbfounded. Truman was absolutely speechless as he tried to figure out how Kevin knew the man. And Lily stared at Kevin, wondering how many other things he hadn't told her. I know what you mean. I'll be more careful about that, buddy. Gabriel replied to Kevin like there was no difference in age between them. They obviously knew each other really well. None of the other people in the store understood what was going on, especially Walter. He looked at Kevin in disbelief. He'd been studying with Tristan Gabriel for almost 8 years, and he'd never seen anything like this. "Sorry to have bothered you with this, my friend. I'll call you back when we have more time to chat." Then Kevin disconnected the call on Walter's phone. He handed the phone back to him and put the box back on the counter. Then he picked up the rag and wiped the box a little more, revealing the intricate details of the carvings for everyone to see. "What are you all looking at? Do I have spinach in my teeth or something?" Kevin felt everyone's eyes on him as they tried to grasp what they just witnessed. Their imaginations were running wild. Was Kevin just as good as Tristan Gabriel? It certainly sounded like it. Kevin shook his head as he thought about how he knew Tristan. When he was a child, his family was really close to the Finch family, and especially to Frederick Finch. So he ended up living with their family and studying with them for almost 8 years. Gabriel trained under Frederick much later. Frederick liked Kevin a lot and recognized his raw talent, so he helped him develop and hone his abilities. Since Kevin had met Frederick before him, Gabriel jokingly treated the young man like an older brother. "So, Truman, do you still want to buy this medieval ivory box?" Kevin asked with a smile. "Of course I'll buy it," Truman replied excitedly. Now that he knew more about the box, he was tempted to keep it as a family heirloom. It would be a shame to turn around and sell it. "Mr. Jordan, are you asking the same price?" Truman hesitated now that everyone was certain that they were looking at an extremely valuable antique. "Of course I am. I gave you my word, didn't I? $2 million, no more, no less." Mr. Jordan was also very excited. It looked like everyone would make a profit today. The other antique experts in the room were a little jealous of Truman, but not too upset because they wouldn't have been able to afford a $2 million purchase anyway. Their shops weren't doing nearly as well as Anderson Antiques. Kevin looked at Mr. Jordan and gave him a nod of approval. He could easily have tried to increase the price after finding out the true value of the item, but he didn't. Not everyone would have handled the transaction so honestly. "Well, my wife and I came here to do some antiquing. I guess we'll go take a little stroll." Kevin took Lily's hand and started to walk towards the door. But Lily didn't say anything more. She just gave Kevin a wink. Everyone stared at Kevin in absolute awe. They definitely wanted to follow him around. If he was interested in anything in one of the local shops, it was guaranteed that it wouldn't be junk. Kevin realized he needed to get rid of the group so he and Lily could wander more freely. "I think I saw some Chicago Cubs autographed baseballs in the store halfway down the block. It looks like they're only asking for half of what they're worth." As soon as the words came out of his mouth, the whole group practically sprinted for the door. Phoebe's father looked a little concerned. "Don't worry, Truman. They're asking for half of what they're worth, but I know they only paid half of what they're asking. The store will get a hefty profit, and so will everyone else." Kevin smiled reassuringly. Truman Anderson didn't know what to say for a moment. When Kevin and Lily left the shop, Truman sighed with relief, but also a little disappointment. Kevin seemed to have become a gifted appraiser. With training from Frederick Finch, he was far superior to any other young appraisers in the country, let alone in the city of Chicago. Unfortunately, Kevin was already married, and Truman would never want to see his daughter break up a marriage. "Truman, what's the matter with you? You need to let your children find their own way to happiness. There are some things you can't do anything about." Mr. Jordan seemed to be reading Truman's mind. "You're right, but it's tough to let go." Truman shook his head and put the thought out of his mind. When Kevin and Lily walked out of the antique shop, Phoebe and Walter followed closely behind them. "What else can I do for you, Phoebe?" Kevin asked with a smile. "Thank you so much for all your help today. Can I treat you to dinner?" Phoebe really wanted to spend more time with Kevin. "I'm sorry, Phoebe, but I have plans today. Let's get together another time," Kevin said with some embarrassment. Since the Night King was coming that evening, Kevin had to buy him the antique sword that was in one of the shops down the street. "I guess we can try another time. Phoebe said nonchalantly. As Walter stood there watching them talk, he wasn't jealous at all. Even his own teacher had been showing respect to Kevin. On top of that, Walter really wanted to get to know Kevin so he could benefit from his advice. "Honey, what do you have going on? I thought we were going antiquing." Lily was unsure about Kevin's plans. "I found out that there's an antique sword next door, and it's really interesting. I decided to go and have a look, and if the price is right, I plan to buy it." Kevin was being deliberately secretive. When it concerned the Night King and the Alliance, the less people knew, the better.
"Let's go over and take a look together. I'd like to learn as much from you as I can."
Walter was sincerely interested. After all, if he didn't have an inquisitive mind, Gabriel wouldn't have taken him on as a student. Plus, he hadn't been challenged much lately. "Okay, let's go see if they have anything interesting." Kevin nodded his head lightly and led the group into the antique shop next door. As soon as they entered the shop, they could tell it was different from the other antique stores in the neighborhood. Everywhere you looked, there were antique weapons, swords, daggers, shields, pikes, helmets. It was an impressive collection. Some of them were very rare, but a lot of the items would only appeal to very specific tastes. The owner was a thin, middle-aged man who was dozing by the counter. Kevin took Lily's hand and scanned the shop. Finally, his eyes fell on a rusty antique sword that was missing its scabbard. "I'd like to see that sword, sir." Kevin knocked on the counter several times with his knuckles to wake the man up.
$400,000,
the man announced as he yawned.
$400,000 for what? Can't we have a look at it? Walter asked in surprise.
"I'm not in the mood right now." The owner didn't seem to like dealing with the public.
"Holy crap, is that how you do business?"
Walter was a young and energetic man, and he was getting very angry at the poor service. Kevin gestured at Walter to calm down, and then he spoke to the man with a smile. "Okay, 400,000. Now it's going to cost you 800,000. The man glanced at Kevin with a twinkle in his eye. "Is that how you do business? We're willing to spend $400,000 and then you double the price?" Phoebe was becoming irate. "That's right. What kind of place is this?" Lily took Kevin's hand and pulled him toward the door. "Honey, let's go." "Well, as the saying goes, you shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth," the man explained. He was still speaking in riddles. Then he asked them, "You're training in herbal medicine, aren't you? Well, my swords are only for customers who are ready to use them. I don't let them go very easily." "That makes sense. 800,000 then?" Kevin agreed with a broad smile. "Kevin!" Phoebe was shocked. "Honey!" Lily was surprised too. Phoebe and Lily couldn't stop themselves from shouting. They were afraid that Kevin was being cheated. Walter couldn't speak at all. He just stared blankly at Kevin. "Why are you buying this sword?" the man asked Kevin unemotionally. "Well, I think you're right," Kevin replied matter-of-factly. "Since your swords are only for those with talent and ability, I'll let the sword judge me." The shop owner took a long, hard look at Kevin, then he turned around and took the sword off the shelf and put it on the counter. As Phoebe and Walter looked closely at the sword, they seemed a bit disappointed in its condition. They also couldn't tell what material the sword was made of. Lily wasn't sure what to think because she didn't know a lot about antiques. Kevin stretched out his hand and trapped the sword with his fingers. The metal seemed to vibrate like a tuning fork, and it took a long time for the tone to dissipate. "It's a good sword. I'll take it." Kevin pulled his black bank card out and placed it on the counter. When he saw the black card, Walter took a deep breath. Now he realized that Kevin had to be loaded. And Walter felt really ashamed about his first impression of Kevin. He was as wrong as he could be. "No, you don't choose the sword. The sword chooses you." The man pulled out a long wooden box and placed the sword in it. "Why are you doing that, sir?" Kevin asked with a smile. "Well, you said that you'd let the sword judge you. Let's see what happens." He pushed the box towards Kevin, and then he sat back in his chair. He yawned and closed his eyes. "I've had enough of this. Let's go, honey." Lily tried to pick up the big box so they could leave, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't even move it. By now, Phoebe and Walter were starting to see how unique this sword was. Even though Lily was petite, she was quite strong. In fact, she was stronger than a lot of people. How come she couldn't even pick up the box? I told you that my swords are only for those who are ready for them. Weren't you listening? Then the man closed his eyes again. I'll try. Kevin, who was very motivated to have the sword, concentrated his strength. When he put his hand on the wooden box, the store's owner suddenly opened his eyes and a slight smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. All of a sudden, the expression on Kevin's face began to change. He started to feel a bit of a shiver and goosebumps started to pop up on his arms. The wooden box vibrated for a moment. Thank you, sir, Kevin suddenly exclaimed. Now, please leave. You've interrupted my nap. The man waved his hand impatiently, motioning for them to leave his store. When they got outside, they found a place to eat and then drove down to Navy Pier to walk around and have a little fun. Finally, after Walter left with Phoebe, Kevin and Lily went to see a movie before returning home. It had probably been the most enjoyable day they'd spent since they got married. They would certainly sleep well that night. But before he could sleep, Kevin wanted to know more about the antique sword he just bought. Kevin and Lily had spent the rest of the evening at the movies before returning home to the condo Lily had bought at the Salix Leaf complex. As he looked at Lily, a smile appeared on Kevin's face. He put his hand on her forehead and touched it gently. Then he turned around and left the apartment with the box containing the antique sword he just purchased. Kevin got to his apartment at Corwin Tower pretty quickly because traffic on Lakeshore Drive was so light this late at night. As soon as he got off his private elevator, he saw a shadowy figure sitting on the sofa. Who's that? Kevin's whole body suddenly tensed and he reached into his jacket to pull out the night dagger. He couldn't see who was there, but someone had broken into his home. Kevin hit the light switch, ready to take on the intruder. The Night King stood up from the couch and turned toward Kevin. Why are you so surprised? I told you I'd be here tonight, didn't I? Why didn't you tell me you'd let yourself in? I thought you were a burglar. Kevin relaxed and put his dagger away. In the 2 minutes since you came in, you had 10 chances to see me. The Night King scolded Kevin. Have you already forgotten what I told you? You taught me to be alert and to respond firmly. Kevin didn't show any signs of weakness when he replied. What's wrong with you? Is that how you talk to your mentor? The Night King stepped over to Kevin very quickly and slapped him on the back of his head. Ouch! That hurts! Kevin winced at the unexpected blow. The Night King was just trying to make a point. Come on, that was barely a tap. The Night King continued calmly. Have you brought something for me? Kevin rubbed his head and tossed the wooden box on the floor. The Night King immediately stepped toward it and smashed it open with his foot. He quickly picked up the sword and held it up to the light. Yes, it's a decent little weapon, the Night King commented as he examined it. You haven't told me what the sword is for. Kevin had been feeling drawn to the weapon ever since he touched it at the antique shop, but it was in horrible condition, more like a piece of scrap metal. The Night King seemed to read Kevin's mind. The name of this sword is Cold Arrow. As he finished saying this, he slammed the sword against the fireplace mantel, and all the rust instantly fell away. Before Kevin could react, the Night King took his hand and cut it with the blade of the sword. Kevin's blood immediately gushed out and splashed on the cold metal. What are you doing? Kevin had no idea what was going on and tore part of his shirt to stop the flow of blood from his cut. Thanks to his improved healing, the wound clotted up very quickly. This sword has been dormant for so many years. It needed some blood to wake it up. The Night King stared intently at Cold Arrow. Then why not use your own blood? Kevin wondered out loud. Nonsense. You just don't understand. The Night King chastised Kevin so harshly that he didn't know what to say. As Kevin looked at the sword, he felt a chill run through his body. "Now that it's absorbed your blood, this sword will be yours." The Night King solemnly placed the sword into Kevin's hand. Kevin was still stupefied by this unusual ceremony. "Well, may I ask what's going on?" "Are you sure you really want to know?" The Night King stared into Kevin's eyes and asked him, "Haven't you noticed anything at all strange lately?" Kevin understood right away what the Night King was talking about. He put down his sword and asked, "Are you talking about what's been happening in Chicago?" "It sounds like you've been paying attention after all. Tell me what you found out." The Night King walked confidently back to the sofa and sat down. Kevin started to list all the recent events that he'd witnessed. The appearance of the Myriads, the Alliance, the School for the Healing Arts, all the powerful and rich showing up in Chicago with very advanced training in herbalism and martial arts. It's like there's a storm brewing. "You're right." The Night King immediately interrupted Kevin before he could finish what he was saying. "It's time to let you know a few things. That way you can start preparing early. This may just save your life." The Night King spoke casually, but Kevin could tell that he was very serious. "There are good and bad forces at work, and they're converging on the city. You found your way into 3 of the organizations, but there are many more." The Night King paused for a moment while he thought about what to say next. "Sometimes, someone comes along whose entire body, right down to their DNA, is open to vast improvements." "Are you talking about me?" Kevin was shocked by what the Night King was saying and was getting impatient to find out more. "Don't cut in while I'm talking. Just listen and pay attention." The Night King slapped Kevin on the back of his head again and gestured for him to sit down on the sofa. "For your entire life, people have recognized your potential. Frederick Finch taught you to appreciate history. Your teachers knew that you sometimes didn't put in the efforts to succeed as you should have, and I saw your potential too." The Night King smiled a little as he said this. "Do you mean I'll be part of this battle that's coming?" Kevin asked again. "There's something unique about your DNA that's left you open to much quicker and greater changes than other people. The pills that you've been working on are more than just herbal supplements. There are chemicals in the natural world that modern chemists and drug manufacturers haven't dreamed of. You're already very different from the man you were when your friend gave you your first power pill. That's why you can heal so quickly and help others to heal too. You're unlocking your true potential." It started to make sense to Kevin. His hearing and eyesight already seemed sharper, and he'd gotten far stronger than he should have for the effort he was putting in. He definitely felt different lately. "Chicago is going to become the first battlefield of a great struggle," the Night King said thoughtfully. "You mean we're going to fight a war?" Kevin gulped hard as he realized what this could mean. "It will be a difficult struggle, and there's no guarantee of victory. The forces we'll face have been underground for a long time, waiting to pounce." The Night King's face turned grim. Kevin had been wondering for a long time why so many odd things had been happening in his city. The Night King walked over to the small cocktail bar in the corner of Kevin's living room and poured himself a shot of liqueur. He took a sip and continued to explain Kevin's purpose. "Today, although science and technology are developing rapidly, the quickest way to prepare is the path that you've already taken. A lot of people are going to depend on you, and it's only going to get stranger from here on out." Kevin felt a cold shiver run through his body. "But don't worry, Kevin. Even the darkest forces that we face don't have the advantages that you do. Not even your own relatives in the Williams family. Don't forget that your DNA also comes from your mother's side of your family. You're like a sponge for the herbal concoctions you've been making and the ones that you'll be able to make, and you won't face all of this alone." The Night King let out a sigh after he said this. For a moment, Kevin felt like someone was watching the two of them, even though they were on the top floor of one of the tallest buildings in Chicago. He tried to shake off the feeling. After hearing everything that the Night King had told him, Kevin felt a little numb. No anger at what some people were planning and no joy at finding out just how different he was. Just numb. The Night King was still standing in the middle of the living room while Kevin looked at the floor and tried to process all of it. Then he slowly raised his head and asked, "Sir, do you think we have a chance to win?"
"Less than 20%, so I wouldn't get my hopes up if I were you," the Night King replied bluntly.
His answer wasn't very encouraging for Kevin. Why can't both sides just talk it over? Kevin couldn't help wondering out loud.
"I know what you're thinking." The Night King slowly walked over to Kevin and patted him reassuringly on the shoulder. "Don't waste your energy worrying about it right now. Remember that this has been going on since long before you were born. Your priority right now is to learn as much as you can about herbal medicine and build up your own power as much as possible." The Night King sounded very earnest as he gave Kevin this advice. "I understand what I need to do." Kevin seemed to come back to life, and he had a gleam in his eye. "It's not about accomplishments. I want you to practice and train so that you can protect yourself." The Night King was as straightforward with Kevin as he could be. Kevin was stunned to hear him say that. This wasn't going to be easy. The Night King sighed as he straightened his coat and started to walk toward the elevator. "Well, now that you know what we're facing, I don't need to stay in Chicago any longer. Don't forget to go to the Alliance headquarters the day after tomorrow for our leader's birthday." Before Kevin could reply, the Night King had already gotten in the elevator. Kevin's head was spinning from all this information. After being rejected by his own family, and Lily's too, now he'd play a part in some kind of fight between good and evil forces that were going to be gathering in Chicago. Just as he closed his eyes, his phone rang. The caller ID showed that it was Professor Colt. Kevin quickly answered. "Is everything okay? Why are you calling me so early in the morning?" "You think that 9 o'clock is early?" Professor Colt said with a smile. "Don't forget that the herbalism contest will be held at noon today. Whatever you're doing right now, you need to drop it and get over here by 10. I'll be waiting for you at the campus entrance." Kevin sprang up from the sofa and assured her that he'd get there as fast as he could. Kevin drove to campus in record time and spotted Professor Colt standing by the school's main entrance. She was wearing a bright red dress. How could he possibly miss seeing her? "I didn't expect you to get here so quickly." Professor Colt walked over to Kevin and greeted him with a smile. "I wouldn't think of letting you down." Kevin was also grinning. "That's enough chit-chat. Come along with me. A lot of people will be attending the contest. If we don't hurry, we're bound to get stuck in a traffic jam." Professor Colt turned around and walked towards the parking lot. "Where will the contest be held, Professor?" Kevin asked suspiciously. He'd always thought that herbalism should be kept out of the public eye, and he expected that the contestants would meet in some remote place. How could there possibly be a traffic jam? "It's in Grant Park, down by the lake, of course." Professor Colt walked briskly to her car while she filled Kevin in on the details. Grant Park was one of the most popular places in Chicago and definitely not secluded. When Kevin and Professor Colt arrived, the park was already full of people. If there hadn't been reserved parking for contestants, they never would have been able to find a spot. Just as he got out of the car, Kevin saw banners from lots of different schools that trained people in herbal medicine. Some of them had pretty harsh reputations. "I didn't expect it to be this crowded so early in the day," Kevin said anxiously. "A lot of people have only heard of herbal medicine but never had a chance to see how it's done with their own eyes." Professor Colt walked with Kevin to the registration table. "You mean we're going to prepare pills in full view of the public?" Kevin asked in surprise. With the training that Kevin had already received, he could be considered a high-ranking expert. One thing he was sure of was that you needed a relatively quiet place if you wanted to do it right. There's too much background noise, the herbalist can be distracted and have trouble controlling the fire accurately, which will affect the final quality of the pill. The other thing he was concerned about is that you can sometimes have an explosion, which had already happened in Professor Colt's class on campus.
Before the professor could answer his question, they heard a booming voice on the PA system.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pavel Dobson, the host of this year's Herbalism Contest. It's a great honor to have you here at Grand Park on this fine day. I'd like to take this opportunity to announce the rules of this herbalism competition. There are 50 herbalists who will be preparing a variety of concoctions. Whoever succeeds in reaching the highest grade of purity will be declared the winner. Now please remember to keep quiet so that we can create a suitable environment for all the contestants. As Dobson stopped speaking, the contestants began walking over to their tables. The crowd was excited to see how this would turn out. Kevin was excited to accompany Professor Colt to the herbalist contest at Grand Park in downtown Chicago. The spectators gasped as the tables were unveiled, and you could see 50 furnaces set up with all the tools and ingredients necessary for the preparation of a medicinal pill. It was an impressive sight, and not one that you would expect to see in the park. Most people went there for concerts and food festivals. This promised to be a unique event, to say the least. As the contestants walked over to their tables, Kevin and Professor Colt searched for number 36, which had been assigned to them at registration. Some of the spectators were students at the School for the Healing Arts. One of them remarked, "Look, isn't that Professor Colt over there?" Their companion replied, "I think you're right. What's she doing here?" But then someone else said, "Hey, who's the man standing next to her? Holy crap, I think it's that guy who married into the Jones family." As usual, this brought laughter from the other students. They just didn't recognize Kevin's potential. Doug Butler and Sherwin Blair were also there, and they were immediately jealous of Kevin. "I didn't expect to see that loser as Professor Colt's assistant," Doug said in surprise. "She probably took pity on him. What else would he be doing here?" Blair said with a laugh. What they didn't know was that Dalton Steele was also there, and he heard everything they were saying. He walked quickly over to Blair and glared at him menacingly. "If you're here to watch the contest, go ahead and watch. But if you're here for anything else, you can get the hell out of here. I don't want to hear a peep from you for the rest of the day." Dalton harshly reprimanded the whole group. They all knew who he was, and they also knew his reputation. Blair was afraid of getting Dalton angry again, so he chose to keep the rest of his comments to himself. But in the front row, there was someone in a VIP seat giving Kevin an icy look like she wanted to kill him. She'd been to the Williams family mansion recently. When she was invited to attend the herbalism contest, she agreed right away without thinking twice about it. "Is that Kevin Williams, the outcast from the Williams family?" Then she wondered, how could a piece of scum like him be allowed to take part in such a serious competition? It's absolutely shameful. But since the contest was already in full swing and so many people were watching, this wasn't a good time to get even with Kevin. That would have to wait. Each of the contestants began choosing ingredients and starting fires so that they could refine their pills at just the right temperature. "Kevin, bring me those 2 ingredients over there." Professor Colt pointed at 2 containers as she started to adjust the flame under the large bronze pot. "Professor Colt, are you going to prepare the Metamorphosis pill?" Kevin asked in a low voice after he handed her the materials. "Oh, have you heard of the Metamorphosis pill?" Professor Colt's tone contained a hint of surprise. "I've read about it in an old book." Kevin was lying to her. In fact, not only did he know how to prepare the pill, but he also knew just how powerful the medicine was. It could make someone immediately jump an entire level of training. But there were 2 conditions that had to be strictly followed. First of all, it could only be used before someone had reached a certain level of development, and you could only take 1 pill in your entire lifetime. If you took more, it would have a reverse effect, and you'd never be able to make any more progress for the rest of your life. That was very important to keep in mind. Kevin remembered reading that it wasn't a very advanced process, but it was good for someone who was still learning herbalism. Professor Colt didn't speak anymore. She just focused on controlling the flame under the big pot. All of a sudden, Kevin's nose twitched.
He could smell that the medicine in the bowl was becoming extremely unstable. "Professor Colt, do you think the temperature might be a little too high?" Kevin wrinkled his eyebrows as he reminded her to watch the flame. "It's okay. This is a very special recipe and the ingredients need to be at a very high temperature, or none of the chemicals can be extracted from them." Professor Colt smiled as she explained to Kevin what she was doing. "No, Professor. The medicine has already started to get unstable. You'd better turn down the heat a little bit." Kevin didn't agree with his teacher at all. He knew the temperature was getting too high. That's when Kevin realized something about Professor Colt. Although she definitely knew how to make herbal pills, she had a lot of trouble controlling the flame. Her technique still hadn't been developed. "I said it's okay, Kevin. Don't worry about it." Professor Colt explained carefully what she was doing. "Maybe you've heard of the metamorphosis pill, but have you ever made one? Watch me closely and you may learn something." When he heard this, Kevin shook his head gently. He'd never made a metamorphosis pill, not because he didn't have the ability or the ingredients, but because he didn't like it. A lot of the pills that he'd read about in his sources were unknown to modern apothecaries. In any case, Kevin was sure that Professor Colt's concoction would fail within the next half hour. At the same time, you could hear one muffled explosion after another from the other tables. Kevin didn't have to ask to know that each of the explosions was a sign that someone else was out of the competition. The crowd sighed after each failure. After an hour and a half, suddenly Professor Colt's bowl made a dull popping sound. "How could that have happened?" Professor Colt's face suddenly turned pale. Kevin sighed. He'd been expecting this for a while now. "Professor Colt, I warned you that the temperature was getting too high. Luckily, the bowl is still solid and there wasn't an explosion." Kevin reassured her as cheerfully and optimistically as he could. "That's impossible. I've made metamorphosis pills several times in the past." Her eyes were full of disappointment. "I think it's because of the bowl and flame setup. You're used to having steel or ceramic containers, but they gave us bronze for this competition," Kevin explained carefully. "What are we going to do now?" Professor Colt looked around in a panic, especially when she saw that some of the other teams had already finished making their pills. Even though the herbalism competition is held every year, this was the first time Professor Colt had taken part in it, and she was really looking forward to doing well. If it ended in failure, she was certainly going to be very sad for a long time. "Professor Colt, I have an idea. Why don't you let me make the pills instead of you?" Kevin smiled and tried his best to sell her on the idea. In fact, he was also eager to have this opportunity to train. After all, the only way to make any progress was to practice. This would be a great chance for Kevin to hone his skills. Professor Colt was stunned at Kevin's suggestion and immediately began to struggle with the decision. Could Kevin really do it? The contest would be over in less than half an hour. "Please, let me have a try, Professor. Since your concoction failed, you're a little psyched out right now. Even if you had another 2 hours, you probably wouldn't be able to do it. If I give it a try, we still have a glimmer of hope." Although Kevin wasn't absolutely sure he was right, he spoke firmly to try to convince her to let him take over the preparation. Professor Colt wasn't sure what to do. Herbalism wasn't something to take lightly, and Kevin was just her assistant. She hoped to compete in other events in the future. What would they say if they knew she'd let her assistant take over? Besides, there was hardly any time left. Even if Kevin knew what he was doing, there are some things you just can't do in half an hour. But then Professor Colt thought of another problem. Kevin was right that she was freaked out. So even if he just made some basic pill, nothing fancy, that would still be better than a complete failure for their team. "Well, come on, let's do it." Professor Colt finally decided and stepped back from the table so Kevin could step up and try to save them from a humiliating loss. This immediately attracted everyone's attention. The spectators in the VIP section definitely took notice. An assistant was taking the place of the main contestant? This was absolutely unheard of. As usual, the students who knew Kevin started making snide remarks.
"Hey, Kevin's taking over for Professor Colt. What the heck's he going to do?"
"Just showing off again," another student commented. They all started laughing hysterically. But when they saw Dalton's fierce eyes sweeping over the group, everyone quickly shut their mouths. At one of the tables, there was a puff of red, yellow, and blue smoke, and the woman who'd been working on the pill reached in and pulled out her creation. The host, Pavel Dobson, announced cheerfully, "It's unbelievable. Contestant number 10 has actually produced a youth pill. They say that it can make you look 20 years younger. I may have to try that one myself." There were a lot of oohs and ahs from the spectators. Who wouldn't like to take something like that? Wayne Ford, one of the VIP attendees, commented to another, "You have an excellent student there, Richard. As I recall, you were able to do things like that when you were her age."
"You're too kind, Wayne. I was just lucky back then."
But you could tell that Richard Swinton was very proud of his student. Suddenly, there was a lot of commotion at the contestants' tables. A purple cloud was floating over one of the bowls. "It looks like your student is really good, too. That's a very impressive display," Richard said in surprise. The other distinguished guest also commented on Wayne's success in training his students. They were all certain that Wayne's student would win first place in the competition. What a great success that would be. Wayne Ford tried to remain calm, but he was very excited at the possibility and the fame that it would bring to a student in his school. Kevin saw what was going on and smiled slightly. Then he took several deep breaths to calm himself down as much as possible so that he could focus. He had to come up with something in 25 minutes and do well enough to place in the top 3. So whatever he did had to turn out just right. After quickly running through all the herbal recipes he knew in his mind, Kevin came to a decision. He reached out and grabbed about 20 different ingredients and laid them on the table in front of the preparation bowl. One of the spectators said very loudly, "What the heck is he doing?" Suddenly, all eyes were on Kevin. All the people who had been mocking Kevin earlier were nudging each other and wondering what he was up to. If he succeeded, they were certainly going to look like fools. Sherwin Blair and Doug Butler were watching this with their mouths hanging open in surprise. By now, all the distinguished guests in the VIP section were whispering to each other as they watched what Kevin was doing with great interest. What would happen now that an assistant had traded places with one of the contestants? One of the VIP spectators, a woman who was seated higher than everyone else, was wondering if Kevin actually had enough time to come up with a pill. Kevin got right to work and cleaned his professor's failed attempt out of the bowl. Then he immediately relit the flame so that the bowl could be heated properly before he added the ingredients. He took a deep breath and yelled, "Let's go." As they watched Kevin add all of the ingredients to the bowl, they began whispering to each other. Some of them were convinced that he would fail miserably. How could he possibly accomplish anything with so little time? Others thought that Professor Colt was secretly helping him. He obviously didn't have the skill to do this all by himself. What really shocked them was that he was putting so many ingredients together at the same time. After all, it's not like he was cooking stew. Professor Colt and the woman who was sitting in the high position both frowned as they watched him. The other contestants also had strong doubts, and it showed in their eyes. One of the basic rules for an herbalist was to treat each ingredient differently and only work with them one at a time. Otherwise, the chemicals in the herbs could affect each other and your pill would be worthless. If you really screwed up, the concoction could even explode. But Kevin didn't care about any of these things at all. He adjusted the flame so the temperature in the herbalism furnace climbed higher and higher. As the entire contraption began to tremble, Kevin got a wild look in his eyes and slapped the sides of the bowl. As he pulled the lid off the brass bowl, the air pressure from the heated contents made the ingredients float in the steam above it. What the heck is this guy trying to do? They all wondered. But Kevin was sure that this was the best way to win the contest. Kevin was rushing to prepare an herbal pill in less than a half hour after Professor Colt's recipe had been ruined with too much heat. The entire audience was astonished to see him mixing the ingredients as they floated in the steam above the large bowl.
"It's a shame that Professor Colt trusted him to take over, and now he's making a fool of himself," one of the onlookers remarked.
Other people who were watching this could be overheard making similar comments. Dalton was too focused on what his friend was doing to bother getting out of his seat to make them all shut up. He didn't know much about herbal medicine, but he was pretty sure that if he went into his kitchen and threw everything into one pot, it would taste like garbage. All of a sudden, the audience roared in surprise as they saw a blue cloud appear over the table where a contestant from the East Coast school was working. It was very beautiful, and for the experts who were watching, it was a sign that someone may have won the contest by making an incredibly difficult and powerful pill. Of course, the rest of the audience members had no idea what they were looking at. They were just impressed by the spectacle and started cheering for the contestant who had done such an awesome job. Everyone thought that this would certainly earn her first place. The experts who were watching this were pleased, but at the same time they were a little worried. Although the competing groups seemed to have a good relationship, they were actually keeping an eye on each other the whole time. They were afraid that any powerful young herbalists in the other groups could pose a threat to their own organizations. Just then, Austin Swift, another contestant from the same region, popped the lid off his bowl and removed some bluish-purple pills that seemed to be glowing. Austin started to smile broadly in spite of being so exhausted from the effort. The MC announced to the crowd, "It looks like Austin Swift has succeeded in producing some very colorful pills. What's the name of the pill? What effect does it have?" He was hoping to inform the crowd, none of whom had any idea what was going on. Now there were two herbalists who looked like they would take first and second place. Austin leaned into the microphone and explained, "It's the reset pill. In less than a minute, it can clear your mind of all negative emotions." But Austin's tone was very arrogant, as if he'd already won first place and he was better than everyone else. But the mysterious woman who was sitting in what looked like an umpire's chair at a tennis match suddenly sat up straighter to pay attention to what Kevin was doing. It was like Austin's accomplishment meant nothing at all. Kevin was actually stirring and manipulating his ingredients as they floated in the cloud of steam above his bowl. When the crowd saw the woman's reaction, they looked to see what had drawn her attention, and that's when they noticed what Kevin was doing. Until then, they weren't really interested in him, figuring he was just wasting everyone's time by being there. However, the experts who were watching knew that Kevin's technique was simply amazing. They could see his intense focus and his ability to control the rare herbal ingredients. The woman in the judge's chair was staring intently at Kevin, and the only word she could think of was, "Impossible." Wayne Ford, one of the instructors whose students were in the contest, commented to the people around him, "Mixing ingredients as they float in the air? I didn't think anybody could do that anymore. Where did he learn how to do it?" The other VIPs in the audience couldn't believe their eyes. And the judge in the high seat was the only one there who understood his technique. To other herbalists, it was like magic. The procedure allowed you to control several medicinal ingredients at the same time while they floated in the steam above the bowl. It was an incredibly advanced skill that took a lot of knowledge and artistry. The advantage was you could control the temperature more precisely, and it allowed you to prepare a pill very quickly, which was just what Kevin needed to do. The judge had only seen this done once in all her time with the Herbalist Society. After a while, Kevin was able to gather the ingredients little by little until they'd melted into the shape of a pill. Professor Colt, who was standing behind him, was stunned. In fact, everyone there was stupefied by his expertise. It's no exaggeration to say that Kevin was the center of attention at that moment. It was like he was the only competitor in the entire contest. Just as Kevin was gathering the remaining ingredients into the pill, you could see electricity arcing around the bowl. It looked like a Van der Graaf generator. "He can do that too?" The judge was in awe. Kevin had one surprise after another. The VIPs who were watching this were tempted to rush over and protect Kevin from the static discharges that were arcing out from around the bowl. While they were all in fear for Kevin's safety, he didn't seem to care at all. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying it. Just then, a giant spark jumped out and struck the pill. Kevin's hair stood on end and he looked like some kind of mad scientist, which he kind of was at the moment. Everyone held their breath, wondering if Kevin's pill had been destroyed by the enormous discharge of electricity. But it was still there, and over the next couple of minutes, Kevin let it happen a dozen more times. Professor Colt and everyone else who had been standing nearby retreated to a safe position about 20 feet away. As the electricity jumped to the pill, it also seemed to get absorbed by Kevin's body. This was probably what the Night King had been talking about. Just seconds before the end of the contest, the sparks died down and the vapor above Kevin's bowl dissipated into the air. When the bell rang, Kevin was holding his pill in his open hand. The audience sat there quietly, and not a single one of them was mocking him. The VIPs were also silent. They stared with uncertainty at Kevin, unsure what to think about what they just witnessed.
"What kind of pills are you refining, sir?"
The host stumbled for a moment and almost called him assistant. But could an assistant do all the amazing things that Kevin was doing? Even Austin Swift, who had just been in the limelight, couldn't come close to what Kevin was attempting. "A primal pill!" The judge practically leapt to Kevin's side, staring at the pill in his hand. "He made a primal pill? How is that even possible?" Wayne commented loudly. Professor Colt thought she was going to pass out. She couldn't even believe this was true. Dalton waved his fist excitedly. Even though he didn't know what a primal pill was, it had to be something fantastic to get this kind of reaction from all the experts. "Yes," Kevin replied simply. "This is a primal pill. It can transform whoever takes it." "I'm glad nobody was shocked by the final step in its preparation." Kevin joked about the technique he'd used. "It's a pity it didn't work," the judge pointed out with a little regret in her eyes. "According to our records, the color of the primal pill should be dark blue, but this one is only light blue, so it appears that you didn't complete the process. However, this is enough to prove that you're already very proficient at herbalism. You should do very well as an apothecary." She announced this very loudly so that the entire audience could hear. When they heard her ruling on Kevin's pill, the VIPs looked very relieved. It would have been extremely embarrassing for them and their students if a mere assistant had won the grand prize in the contest. Kevin couldn't believe it. He took a look at the pill in his hand and then he raised his head and stared at the judge. He knew that he'd made it according to the instructions in his sources. How could he have made a mistake? Professor Colt was looking a little depressed too. She was sure that she would win first place in this contest. Who knew that something like this was going to happen? She'd had a lot of ups and downs today. Dalton got ticked off when he heard the judge's decision. Suddenly somebody laughed and then the whole crowd broke out into an uproarious laughter. "I can't believe I was starting to think Kevin had real talent. What a waste of time for nothing." Sherwin Blair pointed at him and laughed until his stomach hurt.
"What a fake," Doug Butler shouted. "How could Professor Colt have picked Kevin as her assistant? How embarrassing."
While this decision was going on in the crowd, the judge asked, "Is your name Kevin?" "Yes, it is. Who are you?" Kevin was feeling pretty low. Then he thought of something. He knew that he'd made the primal pill correctly. The judge had to be favoring all the VIPs in their schools. Is this how things worked in the herbalism world? In full view of the public, she was willing to play this kind of trick? "My name is Nadia Alexander. I'm the president of the Southern branch of the Herbalist Society. I see you have a lot of talent. Would you like to become one of my students?" she asked Kevin very seriously. Her question attracted a lot of attention from the people around them. It was quite an invitation from a very highly ranked expert. They watched enviously to see how Kevin would respond. His answer surprised everyone. "Sorry, I'm not interested. I already have a teacher." It was obvious that Kevin had already made up his mind. "Why not?" Nadia was smiling. She wasn't angry at all, just curious. She looked intensely into Kevin's eyes. "Because I'm sure there's nothing wrong with my pills. Can't you see that I'm qualified to be a master herbalist?" Kevin took his pill and put it into his pocket. "It sounds like you have a lot of confidence in your abilities," Nadia commented pleasantly. Kevin was a little confused. She seemed like a decent person, so why was she doing something like this? Just then, someone in the VIP section pulled out a dagger and attacked Kevin. It was Ariana Titus, the woman who had been eyeing Kevin so venomously earlier in the day. Before Kevin had a chance to react, he saw the metal glint in the sunlight as the dagger's point stopped just an inch below his sternum. The only reason it wasn't plunged right through his belly was that Nadia had stepped in and placed her hand on top of the attacker's wrist and stopped it. Everyone gasped. They knew that it took an incredibly strong person to do what she'd just done. "I wish I could do that," Blair whispered to Doug. "You shouldn't play with knives. Someone may get hurt," Nadia sneered. Then she bent the attacker's wrist, pulled the dagger out of her hand, and tossed it point first into the ground. "Professor Alexander, please get out of my way. This shameless scumbag has to die for what he's done." She stared at Kevin fiercely. After everything the Williams family had told Ariana about Kevin, she couldn't control her anger. She didn't even care that she was doing this right in the middle of a public contest in downtown Chicago. "But Ariana, I haven't announced the final results. Don't you have any respect at all for the Herbalist Society?" Nadia was doing her best to hide her anger from the crowd, but she was obviously furious with Ariana for interrupting the contest. "Please forgive me, Madam President. I'm just so excited that I can't control myself." Ariana immediately apologized for her behavior. She didn't expect Nadia to let her off easily. Even if the head of her organization, the Union, were there, she would have to apologize. After all, the Herbalist Society was respected by all the major underground groups and all the training schools. But Ariana thought it might help to explain why she was so angry with Kevin. "President Alexander, you may not know it, but Kevin is from the Williams family in New York. 3 years ago, he colluded with outsiders to misappropriate family funds. After being expelled from his own family, he latched onto the Jones family in Chicago and started draining their funds, too. Then, not too long ago, he had a big fight at his cousin Monty Aspinwall's wedding. His cousin's marriage ended in failure because of it. Then he got a bunch of criminals to ruin the Williams family's business." She continued to rail against Kevin. "The worst thing is that he went to his family's mansion in New York with his gangsters and fought with his own grandfather, injuring a lot of his own family members in the process." What a joke! Kevin's actually the loser who got himself kicked out of the Williams family? Sherwin Blair said with a laugh. Dalton stared at Kevin. He knew that his spiritual brother couldn't be the bad guy in all of this. Something else was definitely going on. Officer Emmett's disappointment showed on her face. She really wanted to believe in Kevin's character, but these were some pretty strong accusations. She tried to keep an open mind about it. But Kevin was even angrier, and he clenched his fists. "You have to believe me. This is all a big misunderstanding. I've never done any of these things." Kevin tried to defend himself, but he was squeezing his fist so tightly that his fingernails were cutting into his palms. "Misunderstanding? Is your grandfather framing you? Or is the whole Williams family framing you?" Then, with a disgusted look on her face, Ariana sneered. "If you didn't do anything, why were you driven out of your family?" This really hurt Kevin. His family had been airing their dirty laundry in public, and they were making him the scapegoat for their failures. How could they do something like that? What really ticked him off was that Ariana was foolish enough to believe them without trying to find out the truth. How could he possibly defend himself against these wild accusations? Ariana had just revealed all the Williams family's lies to the crowd. Kevin had no idea how to respond to her crazy accusations. Nadia looked at Kevin and then back at Ariana several times. She thought for a moment and then announced, "I'm sorry, Ariana, but you'll have to calm down. Since there's nobody from the Williams family here right now, none of what you said can be verified." Then Nadia turned to Kevin and said, "Well, the contest is over for this year. Come along with me." There were some things that she wanted to say to Kevin, but not in front of so many people. For one thing, as she stopped Ariana's dagger, she was aware of Kevin's strength. There was something special about him. The two of them walked over to the Herbalist Society's tent, which had been set up near the fountain. Kevin looked around the tent and wondered what Nadia wanted to discuss with him. "Kevin, I'm asking you again, would you like to be my student?" Nadia walked over to the tent flap and looked outside while Kevin remained silent in thought. Then she continued to try to convince him. "You really need to join our society. What everyone saw today will draw a lot of attention from some very powerful people, both good and bad. There are some evil individuals who won't let you go so easily, but we can protect you from them." "Aren't you afraid of provoking them?" Kevin asked in surprise. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into by revealing your talents like that." Nadia turned around and smiled gently. "For a talented herbalist who can create a perfect primal pill in half an hour, you can't afford to offend the experts from all 10 major herbalism schools." "What did you say?" Kevin was shocked to hear Nadia call his pill perfect. "Don't you think I can tell a good pill from a bad one?" Nadia smiled enigmatically. "I'm sorry, but I did it to protect you." "To protect me?" Kevin was obviously stunned and asked her, "Or are you just protecting the schools?" Nadia wasn't surprised to hear Kevin say that. "I'm not sure you understand the consequences of what you did today." She took a deep breath and explained the danger Kevin was in. "There are a lot of people who would do absolutely anything to have access to your skills. Their only goals are money and power. If you let them know your true talent, they'll try to win you over and then use you for their own evil plots. They'll take everything they can from you and then toss you aside." When Kevin heard this, his eyes grew wide. What Nadia was saying was absolutely right. Kevin could easily be on the run for the rest of his life. He'd probably have to get a new identity. "But if you choose to join the Herbalist Society, things will be totally different. Nobody will be able to touch you." Nadia said this confidently, and Kevin could see the sincerity in her eyes. Since Nadia was still young, she had some pretty lofty goals in the society. She was good at training students, and someone like Kevin could help her to move up in the ranks. But Kevin's reply pulled the rug right out from under her. "I'm sorry, but I'm really not interested," Kevin answered her casually. "Well, I can see that your mind's made up, so I won't keep you any longer, but I promise you one thing. Our door will always be open if you change your mind." Nadia smiled very genuinely and added, "You can leave now. I'll arrange for someone to give you your prize for the contest. You'd better give it to Professor Colt. To be honest, I'm not interested in the top 3 awards at all." Kevin turned around and walked out of the tent. As Kevin walked away, Nadia's smile grew wider. What a wonderful student he would be. Kevin was extremely upset when he got home, and he spent the rest of the afternoon sitting on the sofa with Lily. A little after midnight, Kevin's phone rang. It was Spencer, his deputy from the Myriads.
"Your plan went very smoothly, Enforcer. The Hill family has been removed from Detroit. We took all of their industries and businesses. Craig Hill was killed, and we abducted all of his children."
After thinking for a while, Spencer went on to say,
"Unfortunately, Nolan Hill somehow managed to get away, but you can rest assured that he probably won't make it through the night."
"Forget about it. The Hill family's been destroyed. Even if Nolan survives, he won't be able to do anything," Kevin said happily. Then he asked Spencer, "Have you checked the family's property?"
"Of course, Enforcer. You may not know it, but the Hill family had a pretty bad reputation in Detroit. They really made a lot of enemies. Plus, they were selling illegal goods, luxury knockoffs, things like that."
Spencer was excited to tell Kevin everything he'd found out. "Spencer, please remember that we have to draw the line somewhere. Now that we've taken control of the Hill family's business, we have to treat their employees and local residents really well so we can improve our image." Kevin paused for a moment and then gave Spencer another order. "One more thing. Shut down all those illegal companies and get them producing more legitimate merchandise. I'll send you some help." Kevin excitedly hung up the phone and called Tyler, Cook, and a few other business associates. He wanted them to send some of their people to Detroit to straighten things out. The next morning, Kevin drove to campus. As soon as he entered the classroom, he realized that something was wrong. All the other students were glaring at him. But Kevin just ignored them and sat down next to Dalton. "How's it going, bud? Have you recovered?" Kevin asked with a smile.
"Yep. I'm as strong as a horse,
Dalton replied as he thumped his chest. That's great. Kevin patted Dalton on the shoulder. Hey, I've got some good news for you. The Hill family was destroyed last night. The only one who got away was that jerk Nolan.
That's fantastic.
Dalton slapped his hand hard on his desk, drawing everyone's attention.
So, Kevin, do you know who did it? That must have been something to see, Dalton said excitedly.
He'd hated the Hill family ever since Nolan had him beaten up and left for dead. Unfortunately, even though the Steele family was really powerful, they wouldn't stand a chance against the Hills. Professor Colt walked into the classroom. Unfortunately, the lab still hadn't been cleaned up, so they could only have a lecture. But something about her didn't look right. She seemed a little depressed, probably because of what had happened the day before at the herbalism contest. Mike raised his hand and did his best to brown-nose her.
Professor Colt, some students said they saw you at the contest yesterday. How did you do?
She didn't answer him, but just nodded her head slightly.
Who knew that Kevin could even make pills? Someone told me he made a real mess of things. We had joined in to try to win points with the professor. It was useless. He failed completely.
Luther trumpeted loudly so that everyone could hear him. Suddenly, they all burst out laughing while Mike looked at Kevin contemptuously. The reason why Mike had mentioned it wasn't to laugh at Professor Colt's failure, but to ridicule Kevin.
Everybody work hard so you don't end up like Kevin.
Luther didn't want to miss a chance to mock him either. Mike kept trying to flatter the professor.
I think Kevin cheated Professor Colt out of her chance to win. If he hadn't interfered, she would have done great.
Professor Colt quickly came to Kevin's defense. Okay, let's not make fun of Kevin anymore. Yesterday was all on me. I didn't control the temperature well, so my pill was destroyed. It had nothing to do with anyone else. However, the students thought she was just covering up for Kevin.
Professor Colt, we know you're just being nice, but you don't have to do that. We're sure it was all Kevin's fault.
Mike smiled and tried to look understanding. Then Luther stood up and pointed at Kevin.
You're a loser who will never amount to anything. Aren't you ashamed of what you did?
Dalton didn't even give Kevin a chance to react. He rolled up his sleeves and scowled at Luther.
What the hell is wrong with you? Kevin's never done anything to you. Why do you always bully him?
After scolding Luther, Dalton stared at the rest of the class.
You guys think you're so great, but if you had any ability, you'd enter a contest yourselves instead of sitting around dumping on Kevin.
A lot of the students felt bad when Dalton put it that way, but some of them, like Mike and Luther, just didn't get it. A few seconds later, Professor Colt cleared her throat. Now that everyone is quiet, let's begin our class. Today I'll tell you about the preparation method for the metamorphosis pill, as well as its properties and the required ingredients and conditions. But before she could say anything else, a man knocked on the classroom door.
Excuse me for the interruption. Are Professor Colt and Kevin Williams here today?
Everyone turned their heads toward the door like they were all a bunch of owls. I'm Professor Colt. Who are you? She had no idea what this was about. Good morning, Professor. I was sent by President Alexander to give you an award. For some reason, yesterday the president mistakenly thought that there was something wrong with Kevin's pill. As it turns out, he was actually successful, and he's been recognized as the contest's overall champion. So Professor Alexander asked me to send both of you her apologize on behalf of the entire society. After the man said this, he placed a box on the table at the front of the room, and then he left. The whole classroom fell silent. Everyone was staring at the box on the table in front of Professor Colt. So not only had Kevin successfully made the pill, but he'd also impressed the judge. Mike's put-downs had been making Professor Colt feel worse and worse, but now she was starting to feel a whole lot better. Once she'd gotten over the shock and came back to her senses, the professor announced, "Since you prepared the pill, Kevin, you should get the award." "No, Professor, I was just your assistant. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't even have been there. I think it's only right for you to accept it," Kevin answered with a smile. Professor Colt realized she couldn't win, so she gave in and accepted the award. The rest of the class was pretty boring compared to the big news. She did her best to talk about the metamorphosis pill, but the students had a hard time concentrating. When the class was about to end, Penny suddenly turned around and looked at Kevin. I had no idea you were such a super herbalist. She knew that Austin Swift had made a reset pill, but the man who dropped off the award said that Kevin was the champion, which means that he'd done even better than Austin. Well, I'm just a beginner, Kevin answered modestly. Can I ask you to make a pill for me? Penny hesitated a little, but it was really important for her. Do you need some herbal meds? Kevin was a little surprised. For a family like Penny's, what pills couldn't just be bought? Why did she need them? One of my best friends has a rare disease and needs something to cure it. But you wouldn't have much to do. We already know what she needs and found the recipe. If you can prepare it for my friend, you can keep the recipe. Penny thought that might entice Kevin to accept. He wondered what it could be. The Sutherland family had gone to a lot of trouble to track down the recipe, so this could be interesting. That's not necessary. If I make a pill for your friend, you can just treat me to a meal, Kevin replied casually. After all, he was sure that there weren't any recipes that he didn't already have in his books. Are you so confident? Don't you need to ask me the name of the pill? Penny asked in surprise. To tell you the truth, Penny, there isn't an herbal med that I can't make. Kevin may have sounded like he was boasting, but he really felt confident that he could do it. Penny didn't say anything more, but she took a long look at Kevin and decided that he wasn't as useless as everyone said.
Wow, Kev, you're really good. You've even got Penny asking you for favors.
Dalton put his arm around Kevin's shoulder and said,
Any chance I could join you?
What do you think? Of course you can come along. Kevin shook his head. Sometimes he just didn't understand his friend.
Then we've got a deal. Don't leave without me, Dalton said with a laugh.
Dalton Steele, what are you doing? The class hasn't ended yet. Professor Colt scolded Dalton, but didn't say a word to Kevin.
I don't get it. We were both talking. Why did she yell at me and not you? Dalton whispered.
Kevin smiled and shook his head again. He'd learned it wasn't worth it to argue with Dalton. He pulled out his phone and started to play, making sure that he did a good job of hiding it from the professor. After school, Kevin took Lily back home. Then he got a phone call from Penny. He got back in his car and drove to the address in the western suburbs that Penny texted him. When Kevin pulled up in front of the mansion, Penny walked out to greet him. Kevin was a little confused. So what kind of pill do you want me to make? Did we have to come all the way out here to do it? After you prepare the pill, you can grab any snack you like, Penny offered. But this isn't the dinner I promised you. We'll go somewhere else for that. I bought this place to hang out with my friends. When he heard Penny say that, Kevin stared at her and thought to himself, so she bought an entire mansion just to hang out. Is this how her family spends its money? Come inside, Kevin. Some of my friends are here enjoying themselves. Penny turned around and walked back inside. Kevin hesitated for a moment, wondering what exactly was going on. When Kevin arrived at Penny's mansion out in the suburbs, she greeted him at the door and invited him in. He was there to help create a pill to help Penny's friend who was very ill. But he was surprised to find out that Penny had some friends there hanging out with her. As soon as he walked inside, Kevin was stunned. It wasn't because of all the luxurious furniture and expensive artwork, but because of all the beautiful women hanging out by the pool. Kevin was dazzled and tried to keep his composure. Suddenly he heard a charming voice. Penny, who is this man you've brought with you? He's just your type, isn't he? The woman sauntered over to Kevin and lifted up his chin. He's very handsome, but he's dressed in rags. She paused for a moment and asked him, Tell me, sugar, what's your name? Kevin stammered, unsure how to deal with her. Come on, Brenda, let's not do this again. I didn't bring Kevin here to entertain you. Penny was a little irritated by her friend's behavior. Penny's other friends heard this and came over to check Kevin out. They were a little confused to see him interrupt their get-together. They all knew that Penny hadn't had a steady boyfriend in years, so who was this guy? She was usually interested only in really rich, successful men. At the same time, Kevin was wondering about Penny's friends. Based on her status, he was pretty certain that they were all from very wealthy families. They'd probably just come to Chicago to hang out with Penny for a few days and take in the sights. "What are those rags you're wearing?" one of them asked him. "Don't they make you feel uncomfortable?" "Keep your voice down, he's Penny's guest." One of the other women didn't want to offend their host. They were interrupted by a sharp cry. "Kevin, how dare you come here?" Out of the corner of his eye, Kevin could see a figure walking up to him quickly from the doorway. She was tempted to take a swing at Kevin, but picked up on his strong presence and stepped back a little. The women all started whispering to each other, wondering what was going on. What was so special about Kevin? "I'm sorry, Mackenzie, that was completely unintentional." Kevin looked very embarrassed as he tried to calm the young woman down. He'd recognized her right away as Mackenzie Knott, Penny's friend that Kevin had accidentally seen changing her clothes on a video call when he'd stolen Penny's phone. "I don't care what your excuse was. If you say a word about that to anyone, I'll kill you." Mackenzie was obviously still angry with him. She didn't want to hear another word about it, and she especially didn't want her friends to find out. "What's the matter with you, Mackenzie? What are the two of you arguing about?" Penny was confused about her friend's reaction, and she was curious to know what was going on. She knew her friend had a hot temper, but she also knew that Mackenzie wasn't in the habit of picking fights with people for no reason at all. "It's just a misunderstanding, Penny. I don't have any idea who this woman is." Kevin tried his best to keep from embarrassing Mackenzie. "I don't know him either." Mackenzie turned her head and looked Penny in the eyes. Then she asked her, "Why did you bring this guy here? We were all having such a good time without him." Penny figured it was a good time as any to introduce him to her friends. "His name is Kevin, and we're in the same class at the School for the Healing Arts. I invited him here to prepare an herbal med for Mackenzie." Penny felt it was necessary to explain because she could see the confusion in Brenda's eyes. "You're going to let him make a pill for Mackenzie? Penny, are you kidding?" Brenda sneered. One of the other women had her doubts too. "The med that Mackenzie needs would be difficult for a master apothecary to create, let alone some ordinary person." They couldn't believe that this young man dressed in shabby clothes would be able to do something so specialized. They all started to mock Kevin. "Are you sure he can do this, Penny? Herbal meds aren't a joke." Brenda frowned because she was so worried that this could go wrong. "Don't worry." Penny looked at Kevin with a smile and said, "My good friend Mackenzie needs a blood balance pill. Can you create one for her?" Kevin was used to people making fun of him, so he didn't pay any attention to the women's bullying. "The blood balance pill is used for someone who's been injured. It seems to me that she's doing fine right now. Is there some other reason you've chosen it?" Kevin wasn't sure the pill Penny wanted would be helpful and began to frown a little. "Well, Kevin, Mackenzie's been training since she was a child. Her family's really into it and they know a lot about herbal meds. The problem is she has had a really hard time once a month, if you know what I mean." Penny hesitated because she knew it was a very personal issue for her friend. But she was desperate to help Mackenzie and decided to tell Kevin the whole truth. "Penny, how can you tell him something like that?" Mackenzie looked absolutely horrified. She and her friends had spent a lot of time and effort trying to find a cure for her, but when they finally found a recipe that might help, they couldn't find anyone qualified to prepare it. She was desperate. When he heard this, Kevin suddenly thought of something that he'd learned in his studies. If her problem is what you described, the blood balance pill can only cure the symptoms, not the root cause. "Oh, you mean you have a better way?" Penny's face lit up in surprise. If Kevin was right, there might be another solution. Why not try it? But some of them wondered if Kevin was just trying to impress them, and they eyed him suspiciously. He seemed to be promising something he probably couldn't do. How could they trust him? "I think he's trying to trick you, Penny. You should just show him the door." Mackenzie didn't want to have anything to do with Kevin in this crazy plan. "Don't worry, Mackenzie." In fact, Penny wasn't completely sure herself. Then she added, "Why don't we at least listen to him?" Kevin didn't mind sharing his opinion. The blood balance pill could help the symptoms a little bit, but it sounds like Mackenzie's problem has been around since childhood. We really need to do something to get at what's causing her problems. Having said that, Kevin stopped for a moment and then asked cautiously, "Have you ever heard of the repair pill?" Everyone's eyes bugged out when they heard him say that. The repair pill was only a myth as far as they were concerned. It hadn't been used in a ridiculously long time, and the closest thing to it was strictly controlled by the Herbalist Society. But Mackenzie didn't have any connections in the society, so it was impossible for her to get one. "Can you actually make a repair pill?" Penny asked in shock. She'd been worried about her friend constantly and was willing to try anything. That's the whole reason she'd brought Kevin over to her place. "I'm sure I can do it," Kevin said with confidence. "But that's impossible. Nobody knows how to make the repair pill anymore." Mackenzie was the first one to object to the plan. "Are you trying to poison our friend with your nonsense? Do you know what we can do to you if you hurt her?" Brenda was staring daggers at Kevin. She looked like she wanted to gouge his eyes out. "I only have one condition." A slightly cruel smile appeared on Kevin's face. "What condition is that?" Penny looked a little unsure when she saw Kevin smiling so strangely. "If I make the repair pill, Mackenzie has to beg me to give it to her." He spoke softly, but they all heard him loud and clear. "You wish," Mackenzie shot back. The rest of the women frowned at Kevin's demand. After all, Mackenzie was a very important person, not someone to trifle with like that. But if Kevin could really make a repair pill, it would prove that he was greater than all the current experts working in herbal medicine. To do this at such a young age meant his potential was limitless. It was a lot to ask of someone. But if he failed, Mackenzie's friends were sure to get even with him. While everyone was hesitating, Penny suddenly said, "Okay, I promise. As long as you can make the repair pill, you'll get what you want." "It's a deal," Kevin said casually. "But I also have a condition. You must do it right now. There's a quiet room in the basement of my mansion, and it's been set up with a lot of expensive herbal ingredients." Penny clearly wanted to get her friend some help as soon as possible. "No problem, but you can't watch me while I'm doing it." Kevin sounded very firm about this requirement. Then he turned to Penny and said, "Lead the way." Penny gestured for Kevin to follow her. On the way to the stairs, she asked her sisters to stay on the main floor and enjoy themselves while she was gone. A few minutes later, Kevin saw what Penny meant about the quiet room. As soon as he entered the basement, Kevin was stunned. The lab took up the entire floor, the whole footprint of the house. There were loads of medicinal materials on the mahogany shelves along the walls, and there was a large bronze bowl with a burner set up in the middle of the room. Wow, Penny really prepared for this. I wonder if she wants to learn to be an herbalist too, Kevin thought to himself. I had people search all over the country to find all the medicinal ingredients down here. You can use whatever you need for the repair pill. Then Penny walked out so that Kevin would have a quiet environment to work. Well, I'd better get busy. Kevin rubbed his hands together and then hurried over to the shelves to select all the exotic herbs he would need. Kevin was tempted to make another pill that he'd always wanted to try, just for practice, but decided to focus on the repair pill first. More than an hour later, Kevin took the lid off the preparation bowl and removed a handful of pills. Yes, these look good to me. Kevin proudly looked at the pills he just made and grinned broadly. After putting the repair pill into a small medicine bottle for Mackenzie, Kevin put the rest into his pocket. Suddenly his body tensed up. He turned around and took a few steps backwards when he saw a dark figure walk up behind him. He hadn't been aware that someone else was in the room until he heard them breathing. "Who are you?" Kevin asked cautiously. The person seemed dangerous, and Kevin had been caught a little off guard. But they didn't answer Kevin's question right away. "Are you a member of the Sutherland family?" Kevin glanced around the basement and tried his best to find a way out. "Please don't jump to any conclusions. I'm helping Penny to make some herbal pills. I'm not a burglar or anything." Suddenly, the person's eyes seemed to light up and their breathing suddenly changed. Kevin didn't really know what to make of this. Were they there to hurt him? "Trust me, I'm just here to help Penny out." Kevin started to get ready to fight. He thought to himself, "I didn't expect Penny to have someone like this watching over her." But when Kevin looked into the person's eyes, it was like staring at a wolf. He could hear his own heartbeat. "Let me invite you to come with me." The person's voice was very cold, without the slightest emotion, and it was also neutral. You couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. Invite me? Kevin suddenly thought of something. Wasn't today the Alliance leader's birthday? "Well, can you let me take the medicine upstairs first? Then I'll go to the headquarters with you." Kevin spoke quickly. "I've offended the Alliance messenger." The person suddenly moved toward Kevin. "Don't do it!" Kevin stepped forward too, and they both collided in an explosion of energy. Penny, Mackenzie, and the other women were all lounging around on the sofas in the living room upstairs. "Penny, do you really think Kevin can make a repair pill?" Brenda asked seriously. "To tell you the truth, I don't know why so many people at the school treat him like a loser. He can often do some unexpected things." Penny had a thoughtful look in her eyes. "Even though he dresses in cheap clothes, I know he's not short on cash. I'm pretty sure he's got a lot of secrets. So he's probably just throwing his family's money around. What's the big deal?" Mackenzie pouted and said angrily. "But I'm still not going to beg him for the repair pill." "Mackenzie, what's the deal with you and Kevin?" But before Penny had finished speaking, she jumped up as she heard a loud bang, and then the whole mansion began to shake, as if there were an earthquake. "What's going on? Was there an explosion?" One of the women shouted in panic as she fell to the floor. "Calm down. It's not an earthquake. It's something else. And it sounds like it's coming from the basement." Brenda immediately got up from the sofa. "The basement? Oh no! Kevin!" Penny shouted as she quickly ran towards the stairs to the basement. When she and her friends got downstairs, there was no trace at all of Kevin. All they saw was a mess. All kinds of medicinal ingredients were strewn about the floor, and even the large preparation bowl was knocked over, with a puff of smoke wafting out of the burner. To Penny's surprise, a huge hole had appeared in the basement wall, and you could see a sliver of moonlight shining in. "Kevin ran away?" Mackenzie was the first to react and said angrily, "I told you he was lying to you, Penny." "No, it's something else. There was a fight down here." Brenda looked around the room warily. She was the most skilled fighter in the group. If anything happened, it would be up to her to protect her friends. "But where's Kevin?" Penny thought to herself. It was a dark night, and there was a cool wind blowing across the Alliance headquarters property. Kevin had been put into a sack and thrown on the floor. He was starting to worry because he still had no idea exactly where he was, and he didn't feel like he was strong enough to take on any of the Alliance's most senior members. Of course, he'd studied a lot and had an affair with the leader's wife, but that probably wouldn't help him much in this predicament. On top of that, it was the Alliance leader's birthday, and Kevin hadn't shown up yet for the celebration. He wasn't sure if he'd been taken to the Alliance headquarters to be punished. Fortunately, Kevin could sense that someone was finally untying the sack to let him out. "Madam Director, I've brought Kevin back like you asked." The person who'd abducted Kevin stepped back from the sack and waited for further instructions. "You've done a good job. You can leave now. I'd like to be left alone with our messenger to discuss some business." The director was stretched out on the bed in her private quarters. "Yes, Madam Director." Her assistant turned around and left the room. Kevin and the director were alone for the first time since they had last seen each other, and the atmosphere got a bit awkward. "Do you think you can untie my ropes now? It was a little cramped in that sack, and I needed to stretch." Kevin broke the uncomfortable silence with a smile. "To tell you the truth, Kevin, I'm not sure that would be a good idea." The Alliance director slowly stood up and walked toward him. She was wearing a flattering light blue dress, and Kevin could smell her delicate perfume. He thought about what had happened the last time and gulped nervously. "Madam Director, if you have something to tell me, just go ahead and say it. But I don't think I need to be tied up like this. Have I done something wrong?" Kevin tried his best to smile and lighten the atmosphere. "Well, have you done anything wrong? Only you would know that." She pulled out a sharp knife and quickly sliced off the ropes around Kevin's wrists and ankles. "What I'd like to know is how things are going with your mission. It's been a long time and I haven't had a report from you." Her tone was firm and a little cold. "Oh, there's no problem at all, ma'am. It's just that I haven't turned up anything yet." Kevin kept smiling, hoping to ease her mind. "For one thing, there are a lot of experts to deal with on the campus. I've turned the whole library upside down, but I couldn't find anything at all about the consolidation technique." "I told you that the secret recipe and method are in the hands of the Southwest School of Healing. What are you doing in the library of the Chicago School?" She was obviously irritated that Kevin had wasted so much time. "It's part of my plan, Madam Director. From what I've seen, the real experts in the school spend a whole lot of time lurking in the library. So even though the head of the Southwest School has the secret technique, they're at the School for the Healing Arts right now in Chicago. I've been going there for a while, but I haven't met all the professors, let alone the dean. The library's the only place where I have a chance to get my hands on the consolidation technique." Kevin shrugged helplessly as he explained his strategy to the director. She looked deeply into Kevin's eyes. After thinking carefully about it, she felt that what he had said just made sense, so she dropped the subject. "But I'm still wondering why you didn't make the effort to get to the Alliance leader's birthday party on time." The director sounded very serious as she scolded Kevin for his oversight. "Do you know what consequences you'll face if you don't show up as the Alliance's messenger?" "Oh, so you sent someone to get me because you were afraid that I'd get in trouble?" Kevin smiled mischievously at the director. If he was picking up correctly on her signals, the director had a crush on him. "Don't be ridiculous, Kevin. I promoted you to the position of messenger. You really should take things more seriously." The director scolded him again, but it was hard for her to hide her true feelings. Then a strange look flashed across her eyes as she thought about the night she and Kevin had spent together. Ever since then, she couldn't help thinking about him from time to time. "Please calm down. I didn't come back to make a report because I just couldn't bear to face you." Kevin quickly explained why he'd been so aloof. "I've been doing my best to carry out the mission you gave me so I can repay you for all that you've done for me. But it's been impossible to track down the consolidation technique. And I've had a lot of serious fights and injuries." Kevin paused his explanation for a moment as he tried to think of what to say next. But when the director heard that Kevin had been injured, her eyes softened, and she reached out to stroke his shoulder. "Where were you hurt? Have you recovered yet? We have a lot of remedies for internal injuries. Just wait here and I'll ask someone to bring you one." She got up and went to the door to call someone. But before she could take 2 steps, she let out a cry of surprise. Kevin had hugged her around the waist. "Don't worry, madam. It was only a superficial injury. I recovered from it a long time ago, but what hurt was that I've missed you so much," Kevin whispered in her ear. The director blushed as she felt Kevin's breath on her cheek. She started to melt into his arms. "Kevin, you must let go. I'm the Alliance leader's wife. This is against our rules. If our leader found out, he'd kill you." She pleaded with him as her voice grew weak. "Madam Director, are you really worried about me?" Kevin closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Her perfume was intoxicating. "Please let go of me." She could feel the passion in Kevin's touch. The atmosphere became more and more intense. As they embraced, Kevin's hands explored her body, but the director didn't stop him. Instead, she turned to Kevin and kissed him. The Alliance director had needs, and even though Kevin was a few years younger than her, he'd stolen her heart. Just as they were about to take things further, They heard a voice from outside the door.
"Is Madam resting?"
The Alliance director suddenly came to her senses. She quickly struggled out of Kevin's arms and straightened out her clothes. "Hide! The leader is here!" She sat down and took a deep breath to try to calm herself and look like everything was normal. "What is it?" Kevin froze, unsure of what to do. It was like a bucket of water had been thrown on the fire in his heart. The Alliance leader was a powerful man. There was no telling what he would do to Kevin. If he got really angry, he might not kill Kevin, but just throw his body into the woods to be eaten by the wild animals that roamed the property. What should I do? Kevin looked around the room anxiously. "Quick, out the window. My room looks out on the hill, so be careful where you land." The director whispered in Kevin's ear. "Good idea." Kevin climbed out of the window without thinking twice about it. Thanks to the director's warning, he grabbed the windowsill and hung on tightly as his legs dangled outside the building. If he'd jumped straight out, he would have certainly broken his neck. "Be absolutely quiet. Don't even breathe. Otherwise, the Alliance leader will know you're there." Then she closed the window. The Alliance leader knocked on the door again.
"Madam, are you resting?"
"I'm not resting yet. Please come in." Then she quickly went back to lie on the bed. When he heard this, the Alliance leader opened the door and walked in. Even though he was a bit older, he was still a very imposing-looking man. But time was catching up with him, and he wasn't the man he used to be. "Don't you have any business to discuss with your aides?" She was starting to get worried about Kevin and couldn't help glancing at the window.
"I finished talking with them. I just thought I'd drop by to see my wife."
He went to the bed and sat down.
"Your face looks a little flushed. Are you all right?"
"I think it's a little stuffy in here." She came up with an excuse to explain why she was blushing.
"Then I'll open the window for you."
He started to get up from the bed. "Don't worry about it. It's a little windy tonight. I'll be okay." The director was panicking.
"Whatever you say."
Then he pulled a small book out of his jacket and tossed it on the bed. "What's this?" she asked suspiciously.
"It's a rare book I found by accident when I was in the archives. I thought you might want to take a look."
He sounded a little bored. The archives contained all the secret books the Alliance had collected. Nobody was allowed to enter it except their leader. "Thank you." She smiled and put the book on her pillow.
"I hope you like it."
He sat next to her and ran his fingers through her hair. The director didn't answer. She knew that her husband read a lot to pass the time. After she'd followed him to the headquarters, she hadn't been off the grounds in years. The director had a respected position in the Alliance, but she needed something more. And right now all she could think about was her relationship with Kevin. She started to blush again as she thought about him. Her husband didn't notice how distracted she was and changed the subject. "I have some other news for you. The Herbalist Society and the Myriad sent me birthday presents." "Really? Haven't they always been against us?" She was surprised to hear this.
"In a way, yes. But all of us are considered to be outsiders in the herbal underground. Recently, though, the herbal schools have attracted a lot of students and they're getting stronger."
As he said this, he furrowed his brows. "The 10 major schools have always considered themselves superior to us. What galls me is that just a few years ago they were nothing to us." The director looked disgusted by the situation. Her husband seemed really concerned by this.
"The Herbalist Society has gotten a lot of support from some rich industrialists and people who are well placed in the government. They've attracted a lot of skilled herbalists, and there's no telling where they could go. But the rest of us, the Alliance and the Myriads, have become the targets of public criticism. While we've been killing each other, we should really have been helping each other."
He looked at his wife and asked her,
"Guess what they gave me?"
"Was it gold or silver?" The director wasn't really interested in playing a guessing game. Right now, all she could think of was Kevin.
"Wrong. They gave me the technique for consolidation," he said happily.
"What? Why would they do that?" She was surprised beyond belief. As Kevin hung onto the windowsill in the cold wind, he overheard their conversation. Could it be true that the Alliance now had the secret that she'd sent him to steal? From what I understand, consolidation allows you to gather all your power, so much that you can affect everyone around you. Then he laughed and said, I'll leave it all with you for the time being. What are you going to do now? She didn't understand why he decided to leave the secret with her. I already know a lot of the Alliance's techniques. From what I've seen, the Herbalist Society and the Myriads are almost the same. I'd like your help in figuring out what the difference is. It'll give you something to do. After he said this, the Alliance leader got up and left the room. After he was gone, the director took a deep breath and steadied herself. Then she locked the door and ran to the open window so Kevin could come in. He was shivering. Go downstairs and get some soup or something to warm up. She wanted Kevin to get out of her room. If her husband came back, they'd both be in big trouble. When he saw how frightened she looked, Kevin began to smile. Okay, I'll get going. You get some rest. Kevin gave her a kiss on the lips before leaving. She angrily stamped her foot on the ground. How could Kevin be so bold? But she couldn't bring herself to stay angry. After the leader's birthday party, the guests weren't in a hurry to leave. The Alliance leader was still sitting in the place of honor. His wife was near him on the sofa, and Kevin was on the other side because of his position as messenger. Kevin looked around the room, but he didn't see the Night King. He wondered where his mentor was. So, why did the messenger arrive late to my party? The Alliance leader sounded a little irritated. As soon as he said that, everyone turned and looked at Kevin. There were a lot of dignitaries there who had made enormous contributions to the Alliance. Kevin was a relative newcomer, and he'd already moved ahead of them in the hierarchy. But nobody complained because they knew that the director favored him. Before Kevin could reply, the Alliance leader turned to his wife and said, I think Kevin is just what we need right now. He's still young, but he has a lot of potential. And he did rescue our administrator candidates from Brett Stewart of the Myriads. Besides, he's already a skilled herbalist, and the Night King is mentoring him. I think he'll lead the Alliance to great things. The director smiled and looked at Kevin. Oh, is he studying with the Night King? The Alliance leader seemed shocked. It seems that our new messenger is full of surprises. He didn't know it, but Kevin had an even bigger surprise in store for him. Everyone was still gathered at the Alliance headquarters for the leader's birthday celebration. As the Alliance messenger, Kevin was seated in a place of honor near the leader and the director, so some of the senior members were a little jealous. They were very worried because instead of stripping Kevin of his title for being late to his party, their leader seemed to be impressed with him. In fact, he was praising Kevin for his accomplishments. It looked like Kevin's position was even more stable than before. Sir, the reason why I didn't return to the headquarters yesterday is that I made a pill for you. Kevin stood up and held out his hand. Everyone could see a dark blue pill and wondered what it was. What kind of herbal medicine is this? The Alliance leader asked with a slight frown. He knew how to make herbal meds, but he had just studied it a bit when he was younger. This is called the Unity Pill. Kevin's eyes swept around the room and then he explained. This can actually replace every cell in your body. You could hear everyone in the room gasp one after another. If what Kevin had just said was true, whoever took the pill would be given a new life. Kevin still wasn't sure about his decision. He'd actually made the pill for himself. On top of that, the medicinal ingredients were extremely difficult to find. If he hadn't found them in Penny's basement the night before, Kevin wouldn't have been able to do it. Fantastic! The Alliance leader clapped his hands happily. If our messenger can do something like this at such a young age, the Alliance's future is in good hands. We really need more people like him. Kevin smiled casually and dropped the pill in the leader's hand. He didn't know whether he could ever find the same rare herbs again in the future. But now the other members were starting to change their minds about Kevin. They were impressed that he was putting their leader's interest ahead of his own. The Alliance leader gratefully offered Kevin a glass of wine and poured it himself. The party picked up again and the atmosphere got a lot more festive. The Alliance leader walked over to his wife and asked her, Did you find out anything more about consolidation? To tell you the truth, I spent a lot of time on it last night and didn't find anything useful. The director was blushing a little from the wine and tossed the little book onto the table. So I guess we're out of luck. The Alliance leader slowly closed his eyes and sighed. One of the senior members stood up and announced loudly, "Don't worry about it, sir. Do we really need to find out this secret method?" "What he said is very true. You really shouldn't worry about it too much. You're still our leader," one of the Alliance administrators tried to reassure him. Then everyone stood up and shouted, "Long live our great leader!" He was very pleased to hear this reaction. In fact, he'd made his comment in front of the whole group so that they'd know that he wanted something more from them. But Kevin wasn't convinced that the situation was as dire as the leader had said. "Sir, I wonder if you could let me take a look at that book." The room fell silent and everyone looked at Kevin like he was some kind of fool. Nobody in the entire Alliance was allowed to read the book except for the leader and the director. The Alliance leader stared menacingly at Kevin. He could feel the leader's disapproval as his eyes burned through him. "Just because you gave me an herbal med doesn't mean that you can breach etiquette," the leader snapped at him. "This is unheard of," one of the senior members exclaimed loudly. "Even the Alliance messenger can't be so rude," said another. They were all upset that Kevin had tried to break one of their strictest rules. The director quickly stood up and came to Kevin's defense. "Please calm down. He's only been with us for a short time. You have to forgive him. How could we explain it to the Night King if we punished him for this?" The Alliance leader was unsure how to respond. He wasn't willing to listen to his wife's plea, but at the same time he had to respect the Night King. And it would be tough to maintain order if he allowed someone to break the Alliance's rules of conduct. "Please listen to what I have to say." Kevin tried his best to stand firm and show the leader that his intentions were honorable. "What else do you have to say?" Although the Alliance leader's tone of voice was very cold, he hoped that Kevin would give him a way out, so the members wouldn't think he was getting weak. Kevin explained his actions to everyone. "There's something that you may not know. While your experts may be very good at appraising antiques, I think there's something wrong with the book on consolidation that you were given." "Nonsense. The book was a gift from the Herbalist Society. What's wrong with it?" The leader was furious at the suggestion. "Sir, could you please just let me see it up close before I say anything more?" Kevin was very persistent. He knew that the Alliance leader would be finished if he couldn't help him. "I'll give you just one chance." The leader nodded and gestured for Kevin to go to the table. Kevin took a deep breath and picked up the book on the consolidation technique. "Don't believe him," one of the senior members warned. Before anyone else could object, the Alliance leader gestured for them all to be quiet. "If you're right, I'll reward you generously. If not, even the Night King won't be able to save you," the leader declared ominously. "First of all, while this looks like a genuine antique, the paper is too new. How can you explain that there isn't a single sign of aging or use?" Kevin spoke in a loud voice so that everyone in the room could hear him. Then he began to tear the binding off of the book. They were all shocked to see him do this. How could he have such nerve? "Kevin, do you realize I could kill you for that?" The Alliance leader was absolutely furious. Nobody in the room dared to even breathe when they saw how angry he was. "Wait a minute, sir. Why don't you take a look at this first?" Kevin pulled out a tiny black object from the binding of the book. "It's nothing, just a little piece of leather," the leader responded coldly. "Actually, it's nothing that simple. It's a state-of-the-art spy camera, no larger than a computer chip." Kevin held out the little black square in the palm of his hand. The Alliance leader took a moment to focus, and then he could clearly see the camera, along with a tiny hole in the book's cover. If Kevin had really found a spy camera, that meant that the Herbalist Society had intended to watch all of the Alliance's activities and hear all of their secret plans. Just thinking about it, the Alliance leader started to break into a cold sweat. "Do you have any proof of this accusation?" the Alliance leader asked dubiously. "It's very simple, sir. Just get one of your assistants to take it to your lab and verify it," Kevin said without any sign of fear. "If I'm wrong and this isn't a camera, I'll gladly accept your punishment."
"It's outrageous!"
The Alliance leader believed Kevin's explanation and slammed his fist on the table, smashing it to pieces.
"What a vicious thing for them to do! Imagine being spied on in our own headquarters."
The Alliance leader was beside himself.
"I swear to you all that I'll see to it that we destroy the Herbalist Society."
All the members nodded in agreement, including the most senior leaders, and they promised to work day and night to get even with them. After a while, the Alliance leader had regained his composure and turned to speak to Kevin.
"I'm sorry that I didn't trust you."
"As a member of the Alliance, it's my duty to help you in any way I can," Kevin answered quickly.
"Don't be so modest. You've done a great service for us today, and I'll make sure that you're rewarded."
The Alliance leader thought for a moment and continued.
"From now on, you'll have free run of the headquarters property, and I'll allow you to attend any discussions we have."
"Thank you, sir," Kevin replied with a smile. The senior members who'd opposed Kevin's promotion were at a loss for words. They'd been hoping to take advantage of this opportunity to get Kevin removed from his position as messenger. Instead, they'd ended up looking like fools, and he had even more power than before. None of them had ever seen their leader act so generously toward someone.
"Party on,"
the Alliance leader declared cheerfully. He'd already put the entire scene behind him and wanted everyone to have a little fun. Everyone started drinking toast to Kevin to thank him for what he'd just done for the Alliance. The party started at 11 in the morning and didn't end until after 5 o'clock in the afternoon. By the time they were finished, only a handful of them were able to stand up straight from all the toast they'd been drinking. Of course, Kevin was one of them. That doesn't mean that he was a heavy drinker. It was because the herbal meds he'd taken had somewhat changed him, so his body recovered more quickly than everyone else. Whether it was alcohol or poison, he didn't feel the effects for long. As things started to wind down, the Alliance leader asked Kevin to follow him into one of the side rooms.
"Do you know why I brought you in here, Kevin?"
The Alliance leader leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead. "To tell you the truth, I have no idea." Kevin looked calm on the outside, but he was in fact extremely nervous. Is he aware that I've been learning the Alliance's secret techniques? Kevin thought to himself.
"I can't believe it, but after all these years, the Herbalist Society's leader is still nothing but a common thug."
The Alliance leader was thinking out loud.
"Kevin, it seems that you're the first person of the younger generation to join our alliance. It will be your responsibility to carry us into the future."
"I know that you've been around for a long time, and I have a lot of respect for all your experience." Kevin made sure to speak very carefully to the leader so that he could stay on good terms with him.
"Relax and just listen to what I have to say. This is a very serious matter. I know I'm not going to live forever, but I would like to do something to help protect you."
He got up and opened a cabinet to pull out what looked like a piece of clothing made of very thin material.
"Kevin, this is an ultra-advanced type of body armor that we've been developing. As long as you have it on, you'll be invulnerable to any weapons, even heat," the Alliance leader explained as he put the material down on the table in front of them. "Think of it as a token of my gratitude for exposing the Herbalist Society's treachery."
He took a breath and then spoke to Kevin very earnestly.
"I hope you'll be able to live up to our expectations. I'm counting on you, as are my wife and the Night King. Practice hard and continue to devote yourself to the Alliance."
"I'll do everything I can to help you in the Alliance, no matter what it costs me," Kevin thanked him enthusiastically. He couldn't believe how well this had worked out for him. Even though the Unity pill he'd given the leader had been very valuable, this armor was worth even more. It was definitely a win-win. The Alliance leader nodded at Kevin and walked out of the room. When he got back to his bedroom at the headquarters, Kevin immediately put on the armor. It was a kind of undergarment, but he didn't feel silly about it at all. It was pretty comfortable, and Kevin thought that it made him look a little like a superhero. Then he put his pants and shirt on over it, and you couldn't even tell he had it on. This is some real high-tech stuff. Kevin excitedly took out a dagger and tried to cut his left arm. It didn't make a single mark in the material and never touched his skin. Wow, that's going to come in handy, Kevin exclaimed happily. Suddenly, he heard someone knocking urgently at the door. Kevin warily walked over to see who it was. He was surprised to see the director standing there with a seductive look in her eyes. "Ma'am, have you had too much to drink?" Kevin gulped when he saw the state she was in. "Kevin!" She immediately hugged him and buried her head in his chest. "I really like you." The blood ran from Kevin's face. He quickly pulled her into his room and shut the door. If anybody saw them together like this, he'd be a dead man. The director wrapped her arms around Kevin's body and kissed him on the cheek. "I think you've had a little too much to drink. I'll go make something to help you sober up." He tried to gently pull her arms from around his waist so he could help her to sit down. "No, I don't want any meds. I only had half a glass of wine." She paused and took a deep breath. "I don't want to be the leader's wife anymore. I just want you, Kevin." The director started kissing Kevin passionately. Kevin couldn't resist any longer. He returned her embrace and carried her to his bed. A few minutes later, their bodies were entwined as they looked into each other's eyes. The room was only lit by the moonlight that streamed through the window. Later that night, when Kevin was still half asleep, his cell phone suddenly vibrated. Who could be calling me this early in the morning? Kevin reached out and groped for his phone. "Hello? Who's this?" Kevin wasn't angry, just a little irritated.
"Kevin, this is your Uncle Thomas."
He couldn't believe that his uncle was calling him after everything that had happened between them. As Kevin struggled to wake up, a million thoughts raced through his head. Why on earth would he be calling him now? Kevin was shocked. After all, hadn't they ostracized him again? Why would his uncle be calling him now, especially in the middle of the night? Kevin still remembered the bloody scene at the Williams family's mansion in New York when his parents, Mitchell Cook, and his other friends had been abducted and abused. Kevin thought long and hard before responding. Finally, he sighed and asked, "What's the matter?" Even though his family had done terrible things to him, he couldn't bring himself to be unkind. That's what made him a better man. "You need to come back home and see your grandfather for the last time," Thomas sighed in despair. When he heard this, Kevin's eyes grew wide. Although Grandpa Williams was very old, he was still in very good shape and had been training his whole life. He should be able to live for at least another 30 years. "Is he ill?" Kevin's breathing became a little short. His grandfather loved him very much when he was a child. Their relationship had been strained in recent years, but his grandfather still meant something to him. "It's hard to talk about over the phone. If you still have any feelings for him, come to New York City right away. He's in the hospital." Then Uncle Thomas abruptly hung up. Kevin wasn't aware of it, but his body had tensed up during the call. Suddenly, he became aware of the director's head lying on his chest. She fluttered her eyes and asked him, "What happened last night?" After they made love, she chose to stay with him. She felt more pleasure with Kevin than she had in years. Even with all her status and wealth, that was what had been missing from her life. "It's nothing at all. Don't worry about it." Kevin gave her a kiss on her forehead. "That's okay." The director hugged Kevin tightly and asked, "When will you leave the headquarters and return to Chicago?" "What? You want me to go already?" Kevin said with a smile. "I'm afraid the Alliance leader will find out what we're doing, and that wouldn't be good for you." The director started to look sad. "If I could, I'd ask you to stay with me for the rest of my life." "If I could, I'd take you away from here and never come back." It pained Kevin to see her like this. The director's name was actually Selina Salem. Because of the Alliance's customs, until last night, Kevin never knew what name she went by and that she was actually from a very rich and powerful family. After giving Kevin a long, passionate kiss, Selina reluctantly left. "I have to hurry back to my room. If anyone found out, we'd both be in a lot of trouble." Kevin didn't speak. He just nodded his head. He knew that he didn't have the power right now to take her away from the alliance. After Selena left, Kevin could still smell her perfume on the pillow. He made up his mind to develop his strength so that he could take her away from the alliance as soon as possible. But right now, neither of them was powerful enough to take that kind of step, not against such a formidable organization. After a few hours, Kevin arrived in New York City. The hospital was full of Williams family members. There were also a lot of influential politicians and members of the business world who were there to visit with Randall Williams, Kevin's grandfather. But everyone was still puzzled about how he'd suddenly fallen ill. As Kevin had found out through his exposure to herbal medicines, someone with his grandfather's level of development should be able to fight off many fatal diseases. It seemed that he had probably been poisoned, not in a single dose, but over a long period of time. Over the course of the previous month, Randall had felt more and more tired as the level of poison had increased in his body. It looked like nobody could save him now. At first, Thomas had decided to keep the news of Randall's illness a secret. He was just too important a figure in New York, and if people knew that he'd been poisoned, it would have hurt the Williams family. Grandpa Williams lay in his hospital bed, very lethargic and looking gaunt. His skin was an odd bluish-purple color. All the senior members of the Williams family were at his bedside looking extremely somber. They would be lost without Randall.
"Thomas, did you call Kevin?"
Randall asked weakly.
"Don't worry, Father. I've told him,"
Thomas replied hesitantly. But he didn't tell the poor sick man that although Kevin hadn't refused, he hadn't agreed either.
"Good."
Grandpa Williams nodded his head lightly. Even though Kevin had angered the entire family, he was still his grandson after all, and he still wanted to see him before he died. "I don't understand, Dad. Why did you call Kevin to come here? He's been banished from the family." Laura couldn't help wondering. Monty Aspinwall and Ethan Williams were standing by the window. They didn't understand why Grandpa had asked for Kevin to come to his bedside either. Was he going to make out a will?
"Let's change the subject, Laura. If Dad wants to see his grandson one last time, who are we to stop him?"
Thomas Williams frowned as he scolded his wife. As for Randall's poisoning, Thomas had a few suspicions, but since he still didn't have any evidence, he kept acting like he was clueless. As soon as Kevin entered the hospital, he attracted a lot of attention, but he wasn't in the mood to say hello to anyone. He stopped by the front desk to ask which room his grandfather was in, and then he walked up the stairs. Some of the people who were waiting in the lobby recognized him and started to whisper to each other. They believed all the lies that had been spread about what he'd done to the family and how he'd been ostracized.
"What's he doing here?"
they were all wondering. As soon as Kevin stepped out of the stairwell on the 4th floor, he was spotted by a lot of the senior members of the Williams family, who were standing around in the corridor.
"Kevin, you have a lot of nerve coming here,"
one of his relatives sneered.
"Get out of here right now,"
another one shouted. It certainly didn't look like a warm family reunion. They made a lot of noise insulting Kevin and telling him to get out. "Hey, Uncle Thomas called and asked me to come. I'm here to see my grandfather, not you." Kevin wasn't afraid to tell them off. When he walked into Grandpa's room, everyone's eyes were riveted on him. His Aunt Laura even tried to block him from entering the room. "You're not wanted here, loser. Why don't you head back to your wife in Chicago?"
"My mother's right. Get out of here right now, Kevin. My grandfather doesn't want to see you."
Ethan snarled at him. Of course, Ethan didn't want Kevin to come into the room. Since Randall Williams didn't have a will, if Kevin came back, that meant dividing his estate up even more, and less money for Ethan.
"What are you all shouting about? Get out of the way. I invited Kevin here myself."
Thomas walked over to them with a scowl on his face. "Are you kidding? Do you know how angry your father will get when he sees this trash?" Laura was furious with her husband. How could he bring Kevin back just when they were about to inherit the family's wealth? This was a disaster.
"I'm not kidding at all. In spite of everything, Kevin is a member of the Williams family. It's only right for him to see his grandfather one last time."
Thomas shut her down right away. Then he looked at his nephew and sighed heavily.
Grandpa isn't awake right now. Have a seat at his bedside and wait for him to wake up again.
Kevin nodded his head in agreement and walked over to the bed.
Step outside with me.
Thomas glared at Laura, and the two of them left the room. Monty and Ethan clenched their fists as they stared at Kevin, but they both had different feelings toward him. Ethan's eyes were full of contempt, while Monty's were full of resentment. Thomas and Laura walked all the way down the hall to the stairwell. "What are you calling me out here for?" Laura was in a very miserable mood. Thomas leaned in close to his wife and growled, "Are you nuts?" "What do you mean? I think you're crazy for inviting Kevin here right now." Her eyes were burning with anger.
"You're the crazy one," Thomas shouted. "Don't you realize Dad was poisoned?"
Laura was stunned when she heard this, and Thomas could see the panic in her eyes. "What do you mean? How could he have been poisoned when he's been shut away in seclusion for so many years?" Laura replied to him sternly.
"Maybe you haven't been in direct contact with Dad all these years, but you're the one who plans everything in the family."
Thomas hesitated for a moment before he got to the point.
"I had my suspicions, but when Kevin showed up in the room, you gave away some clues."
Laura didn't say anything to refute her husband's accusation. She just let Thomas keep talking.
"Tell me why you did it, Laura."
Thomas gritted his teeth and asked her.
"The Williams family has treated you well all these years. How could you do such a heartless thing?"
"Ha!" Laura suddenly laughed. "How can you ask me something like that? Okay, I'll tell you the truth. Why should I hide it anymore? Thomas, don't you ever feel like you're not a real man?" She paused for a moment to let that sink in. "You're obviously senior to Kevin, but you couldn't hold a candle to him. If I didn't find a way to drive him out of the family, there's no way you'd be able to take over after your father died. If I hadn't arranged for Hannah to disappear, how else could I keep Kevin from returning to our family? Don't you realize that Randall loves his grandson too much to not welcome him back into the fold?"
"So it's true then?"
Thomas looked deeply into Laura's eyes. He never thought that his wife could do so many things behind his back. "You figured it out. I found someone to poison Randall. Hannah never went home, and I'm the one who made sure of that. Now Monty hates Kevin, and Kevin never embezzled the family's funds. I found someone to forge the evidence to make it look like he'd been funneling money from the family's accounts." Laura sneered and concluded, "There you have it. It was me."
"But why did you do all that? Kevin's your own nephew."
Thomas's hands were shaking. "So what? I didn't have any choice. Ethan is a loser. All he knows is to sit around all day and waste his time. If I hadn't done this, Kevin would have ended up running the family's businesses and we'd have lost everything." Laura didn't care about anything but her own future. Once Dad is out of the way, you can take over the whole Williams family. Everything really belongs to us anyway, and now nobody can take it away. Laura told her husband the rest of her plan. "If you're worried that Kevin will be left penniless, you can just pay him off. I don't care how much. It'll be worth it. Every man has his price."
"But you—"
Thomas was so frustrated and disappointed in his wife that he didn't know what else to say. While this was happening, Kevin was sitting next to his grandfather's bed looking very sad. Even though the Williams family had kicked him out, how could he not be upset? He still loved his grandpa.
"Hey, you bastard. Are you really going to wait around until Grandpa wakes up?"
Ethan stood behind Kevin and looked down at him. He sneered.
"I advise you to get out of here. If he wakes up and sees you, he'll only get angry."
"Your father asked me to come here and I'm staying. Don't tell me what to do," Kevin said brusquely.
"He's very sick. I don't care if you are his grandson. I can't let you be the last thing he sees before he goes."
Ethan sneered menacingly.
"So get out of here now."
Kevin ignored his cousin's order and continued to sit with his grandpa. Suddenly his grandfather woke up. When he saw Kevin sitting there, his eyes lit up.
"Grandpa, are you awake?"
Ethan immediately asked him with a smile. Kevin sighed happily and called out, "Grandpa."
"Kevin, I'm really glad you could come,"
Randall said weakly. He'd been worried that Kevin wouldn't come back to see him. After all, he'd had his family do horrible things to Kevin's parents, Alan and Susan, and he'd even tortured Kevin's friend Mitchell. "Just rest and get better, Grandpa." Kevin didn't know what else to say. A few minutes later, a nurse ran in and looked around the room. "Are all of you Mr. Williams' family members? Our team of specialists may have come up with a procedure to save him."
"What would that be?"
Thomas asked her urgently as he walked back into the room. "Mr. Williams' blood is full of toxins. We can give him a transfusion to clear them out." Then the nurse added, "But I want to emphasize that this procedure involves a lot of risk. If either Mr. Randall or the person who gives him the transfusion isn't in good enough health, they could die. The donor could even suffer health problems for the rest of their lives." All the family members in the room and out in the corridor heard this, and their faces turned grim. When they heard that the procedure could kill them or irreversibly weaken their health, they cringed. A lot of them were young and just starting to train their bodies with the help of the Myriads. Grandpa Williams had already lived a long life. Why should they risk themselves just for him? They were all incredibly selfish. When Kevin saw everyone's reaction, he was disappointed in his relatives. How could they call themselves the protectors of the family? They owed everything to his grandfather's efforts over the years, and they'd be nothing without him. It looked like it would all be up to Kevin now.